Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku, back with another fanfiction. This is the second part of What If Deku Had Electric Heart. Now before starting, please give this video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. As Power Loader walked into his office, he looked over at his desk, which held his laptop and school phone. With a sigh, Power Loader powered on his laptop and began looking through the register upon he came upon Inko's phone number. He quickly punched it into his school phone, but then his finger hesitated over the call button. Calling the parents of one of his students wasn't a new thing. Accidents and injuries were common occurrences in the support course at UA High. He had several of his students' parents' numbers on speed dial. Some were even on a texting basis as these students got injuries the most often. Yet he never had a student whose parent he knew about from a previous work relationship. Now he had never actually met Inko in person before, only hearing her voice over Hishashi's phone calls. Yet this was different from every phone call he had made in the past. Power Loader could feel his heartbeat as he looked at his phone. 5 minutes later and his finger still hovered over the button. A simple button that would most likely lead to a tearful conversation. Though Power Loader didn't know whether it would be from him or Inko. Power Loader closed his hand for a second, then opened it, before taking a deep breath and pressing the button. The moment the dial tone began, Power Loader swiped the receiver and held it up to his ear. With each beep, Power Loader felt his heartbeat begin to match the rhyme. After the fifth tone, the line connected and Power Loader heard Inko's voice again after 9 years. "Hello, this is Izuku Midoriya. How may I help you?" Inko said. Her voice was sweeter and kind than Hisashi had ever described. Power Loader couldn't help but think, "My friend, I want to respect your life and know why you did what you did, but you really screwed up. Hello, are you there?" Inko's voice came again. Power Loader paused for a second. His mind was blank. He didn't know whether to ease into explaining everything or dive into the deep end. The first call with a parent was always the hardest, but Power Loader didn't feel like calling Inko was ever going to get easy. "Hello, Ms. Midoriya. This Power Loader, Izuku's homeroom teacher." Power Loader began. "Oh my god, is my son okay? What did my son blow up this time?" Inko asked, her voice taking on concern and worry. Power Loader clenched his teeth before saying, "Your son is okay." Making parents worry about their child was always Power Loader's least favorite part of the job. "I don't like how that sounds," Inko said. Her voice was no longer sweet, more like a police officer trying to force information out of someone. Power Loader felt like he was standing at gunpoint. "I can see where your comment about her being a mom bear came from, Hisashi." She went straight to it. Power Loader didn't know how to break it to Inko. He didn't want to make it seem like her son was in danger or that UA was the one that put him in danger. "Ms. Midoriya, are you familiar with the issue that your son's quirk causes him when he becomes panicked?" "Yes." "His arc reactor becomes overloaded and begins to discharge energy in the form of lightning," Inko said, with such a knowledgeable voice. Power Loader thought he was talking to an actual engineer. He figured that happens when you marry one, you start to sound like one. "Understood. And are you aware of what happens if your son does not have his arc reactor within that state?" Power Loader asked. If he was lucky, he didn't have to explain everything. "No, I am not. Izuku always wears his arc reactor. He always has it on. Sometimes I think it's fused to his chest." Inko paused for a bit, then asked, "What happened?" "There was a panic at the school. Nothing to worry about. The issue was handled quickly. Yet the students in the lunch hall were caught unaware and it caused a bit of a panic. Your son's friend, Meihatsume, explained the situation better. Your son knew he was beginning to overload his arc reactor, but he was more afraid of hurting the student around him. He disconnected his arc reactor to prevent it from discharging itself, in turn forcing the static electricity to build up in his body. Your son managed to hold on long enough for Hatsume to get him out of the building into the support department. We locked him in an empty classroom, which allowed him to discharge over 1,000 gigajoules of electricity," Power Loader said, restating Mei's explanation from earlier. "You lost me a bit." Inko's voice still had concern, but now a tad bit of confusion lined in. Hatsume explained that when your son discharges electricity in such a way, it causes him great pain and exhaustion. He is currently being watched over by UAS Pro Hero Nurse, Recovery Girl. However, due to his extreme level of exhaustion, she is not able to use her quirk on him without causing him further pain. Power Loader figured Inko was sitting down at this point. However, a loud crash on wood told Power Loader she had just fallen. "MDM, are you okay?" Power Loader could hear her crying over the phone. "So that the waterworks, you were always talking about Hisashi." "MDM, I want you to understand that your son is fine and is being taken care of. He is currently asleep and recovering and he's expected to wake up by tomorrow morning." Power Loader lied about that last part because he knew what Inko needed to hear. "Power Loader, is my son okay?" Inko said she had to know. At the moment it was the only thing she cared about. "Yes." "How long until school gets out?" Inko asked, her voice still filled with worry, but now it was firmed. All she cared about was protecting her son. Power Loader looked at the clock on his phone. School gets out in 3 hours. Good, I'll be there to see my son. With that, the phone call ended. Power Loader looked at his phone for a bit, trying to make sense of what just happened. His mind wandered to one of the first times they were able to get away from UA after Hisashi left Inko and Izuku. They had gone out late to drink and Hisashi began to talk about Inko. I can't think what story my wife will tell my son. In the beginning, I knew they were safe and I could love them. But now I'm in so deep, the only way I can protect them is to leave them behind. I still want to help my son become the hero I know he can become. Hisashi leaned on the top of the bar. His drink lazily rested in his hand. Hisashi, I think that when the time comes, you'll be able to return to your wife and kid and repay for the times you've lost to protect them, Power Loader said, trying to cheer up his friend. Honestly, at this point, I don't even care if the other teachers find out. I don't care if I have to do things outside of the law. I just want to protect my wife and son and make sure they have a bright future. Hisashi took a long drink of his drink. I'm just afraid when I do return whatever lie or story Inko told Izuku to make him forget about me. I just hope I'll be able to show him what kind of father I always wanted to be. Power Loader closed his phone. He didn't have any more classes for the day. He would have time to do this, and it was clear Principal Nezu had plans to do it within the next few days. Power Loader stood up and walked over to his workbench, a crowbar already waiting for him. Power Loader swiped the crowbar on the workbench and headed out of his office. As he walked down the hallway, all his attention turned to Class 6G, the most dangerous room in all of UA, and several of the rooms had reputations. Yet while other rooms could hurt, harm, or injury, the equipment and technology that rested in Classroom 6G were world-ending. To most teachers, it was a simple old classroom that belonged to an old teacher. The reason it was boarded up was different depending on which teacher was asking. But only Power Loader, Principal Nezu, and Recovery Girl knew the real reason. And the fact the boards were a facade. Then real security was whatever Hayashi had built into the doors. A security program so advanced and complex, Power Loader couldn't dismantle it, nor could Principal Nezu hack into it. And what was hidden behind the door? Technological advancements that could shift the world's control to anyone that could get their hands on it. Engineering advancement Hisashi had made in his quest to turn his son into a hero. Devices even nowadays could only exist in the wildest dreams of engineers. Well, that's at least what Power Loader thought, as not even he had seen the kind of work Hisashi set his free time on. Why less would the door be boarded up? As the door to Classroom 6G appeared, Power Loader brought his crowbar up and then rammed it into the first board. With some effort, Power Loader ripped the first board off and let fall to the ground. As Power Loader worked on the second board, he could only think, Hisashi, I'll make sure your son knows what you did and sacrificed for him. Over the next 2.5 hours, Power Loader worked to rip all the nails out of the barred door. Once the last nail came out and the last board fell in next to the floor, Power Loader stopped and took a deep breath. Ripping the nails out felt like reopening an old wound, something Power Loader wished he could forget about. Yet he knew if he didn't, he would be disrespecting Hisashi's memory. Power Loader took a deep breath and then fell to his knees. I assume you've spoken with Ms. Midoriya then. Principal Nezu announced his presence with that statement. Yeah, she'll be arriving within the next 2 hours to see her son. Power Loader let go of the crowbar, allowing it to fall onto the wood it had just pulled off the wall. Hisashi always said Inko cared about her son more than we could ever understand. Principal Nezu said, I'll be at the front gate to greet her. No need to start another panic. Yeah, that's what got us into this mess. Power Loader grumbled a bit. Would you like that honor? Principal Nezu said, pulling out the key. He held it out, holding it by the metal key ring. Power Loader was tempted to take the key and open the door. However, everything in that room was left for Inko and Midori. I think they should be the ones to unlock the door and see for themselves what Hisashi has done for them. Principal Nezu flipped the key back into his paw. I'm glad you agree. Principal Nezu left Power Loader by himself at the door. Once Inko had ended the call with Power Loader, she wanted to walk into her boss's office and asked to leave early. Her boss owes her a million favors, as after she got hired as his accountant, the first matter of business she took care of was getting all of his company's finances in order. Her boss liked to joke she was the reason his business was still afloat, but she forced herself to refocus on work and not allow herself to get distracted. Izuku had been in dangerous situations before. Whenever he tested one of Mei's less than safe inventions, and Power Loader reassured her that Izuku was fine and safe, if not a little banged up, but that was expected of teenage boys. But whenever she stepped away to take a breath, she found her mind wandering back to the call she had with Power Loader. She was looking over an order of advanced AI process chips that had been created for a military project when a knock came on her doors. It's open, Inko said. The door opened, sliding across the smooth oak floor of her office, and in walked her boss. He was Dia's white beard, as it reflected the overhead light. How are you, Ms. Midoriya? I heard you fell not too long ago. I'm fine. I got a call from my son's school. He was a bit injured and I was a little concerned, Inko said. She tried her best not to sound panicky, but it appeared in her voice, a bit injured and little concern. Don't usually result in someone falling to the floor, Inko's boss said, as he walked over and leaned over the chair that faced Inko's desk. Inko chuckled a bit. I guess not. There was a break-in and it caused some panic. My son lost a bit of control of his quirk and in the end, he injured himself to keep it from injuring the other students. Shows like he's quite the hero. He does go to UA if I'm not mistaken, Inko's boss said as he moved around the chair and sat down across from Inko. Yes, he was hoping to get into the hero course but was accepted into the support course. I will admit I was glad he would not be in direct danger as he would be in the hero course, but it seems like just being at the school will get him into danger. Inko would never say it out loud, but she was glad when Izuku wasn't accepted into the hero course. Her son won't be in direct danger, but clearly, fate had a twisted sense of humor. He's a strong kid, but if he would like to leave early, I'll understand, Inko's boss said with kind eyes and a gentle voice. No, I'm fine. I'll leave when his school gets out. Besides, this is a project you've spent the last 4 years working on. I'll be fine, Inko said as she reached forward to her keyboard to finish looking over the order. Inko's boss held his hand up defensively. I understand, and that's why I'm glad I hired you. You love your son so much. He stood up and began to walk out. Mr. Sutin, thanks for understanding, Inko said. My pleasure. But as you said, I've been working on this project for 4 years. If you need to leave, I'm sure the project can wait a few more hours, Mr. Sutin said, before walking out and closing the door. As he walked down the hallway, his cell phone went off. It was a blocked number, but he answered it and opened with, I heard the break-in was successful. It was. My apprentice handled the security system with ease and your authorization key allowed us to break into UAS more secure servers. The plan in a week, a cold voice said. Were you able to locate the file of the power source? Mr. Sutin asked. It seems UA was no closer to finding a power source than you were. We'll send you what we got. Hopefully, it will help you. Will your prototype be ready? The cold voice asked on the other side. You might work in biology, but engineering is an art form. It's more than trial and error. It took Hisashi Sutaku years to build his masterpiece. If you were able to copy the information I needed off of UAS server, then I can build it within days. Then Hisashi Sutaku will see what kind of power his creations could have given him. Mr. Sutin ended the call and dropped his phone into his pocket. Izuku slowly opened his eyes. The blind light of the room was harsh against his vision. Slowly the room came into focus and he saw it was a medical-style room. Where am I? Izuku said, then felt his extremely dry throat. You are my office, the medical section of UA. Good afternoon, Midoriya. You gave us quite the scare after you burned that room, an elderly voice said. Izuku thought about where he had released his quirk. He had passed out before he got a look at the room. Is everyone okay? Your friend Mei Hatsune got you to the support department where Powerloader used the advanced fire suppression system installed there. Izuku looked over and recognized the nurse as Recovery Girl. If he wasn't so tired and thirsty, he would have requested an autograph. Recovery Girl walked over and held a glass to his lip. I used 5 IV bags on you, but your body is still going to be sore. I went through 5 IV bags in just a few hours, Izuku asked after a few sips. The water felt going down, but it caused him to cough a bit. Few hours? You've been asleep a lot longer than a few hours, Recovery Girl said, lifting her cane and tapping it against a clock on the wall. Izuku looked at the clock. It read 3:58. But you said good afternoon. Izuku was extremely confused now. Of the next day. You were passed out for a little over 25 hours. You didn't miss much. It's still the first week of school. A knock came on the door. And your mother is here. My mother, Izuku nearly yelled, wanting to hide from the wrath of his mother. He knew her worry could easily become fury. Yet in his tired state, he could barely move a finger. Recovery Girl walked over to the door and opened it. Outside were Izuku Midoriya, Hatsune, Powerloader, and Principal Nezu. Izuku locked eyes with her son before rushing into the room, nearly knocking Recovery Girl over. Once she got to her son, she wrapped him into a tight hug, causing Izuku to give out a small squeak of pain. Mom, still sore. However, Izuku just tightened her hold on her son. Well, this is a lovely family reunion, Principal Nezu said, calming, walking into the room, with Powerloader and Mei behind him. Mei walked up and gave Izuku a small hug, then whispered in his ear, your mother agrees with me. The next time you do something like that, we'll kill you. Izuku flinched at the statement because he knew it was true, and the police would never find his body. Midoriya, while I'm glad you were able to assess the situation and choose the option that harmed the least amount of people, I hate to see you make those kinds of choices at the expense of yourself. You are my student, and it is not only my job to teach you, but to make sure you stay safe, Powerloader said, looking Izuku in the eyes. Izuku was confused at the last part of the Powerloader statement. What do you mean to stay safe? I'm in the support course, and the worst thing I experience is Mei's exploding inventions. Mei would have smacked Izuku, but then again she didn't attack poor defenseless things. After a few moments, Powerloader sighed, you're going to need a wheelchair. I can walk, Izuku said and began to lift himself off the bed. No, you cannot. Inko, Mei and Recovery Girl all shouted. Izuku slowly lowered himself back into the bed, surrendering to them. Midoriya, you have been unconscious for the last 25 hours. Your muscles are weak and you have no energy to burn. If you want to leave this room, it will be in a wheelchair, the Recovery Girl said. Izuku looked between the 3 women in the room, then sighed, admitting defeat. Fine, I'll take the wheelchair. At that moment, he would do anything to get out of this room. Good, I'll send a message to Lunch Rush to prepare you something light to eat on the way, Principal Nezu said, then pulled out his phone. Recovery Girl disappeared, to return shortly with a wheelchair that had a foldable tray on its side. Recovery Girl and Mei helped Izuku into the wheelchair, and then Inko grabbed the handle on the back. While Inko pushed her son in the wheelchair, Mei, Power Loader, and Principal Nezu followed behind. As they passed the lunch room, Lunch Rush stepped out and gave Izuku a small tray of food. Izuku thanked Lunch Rush, who excused himself. As they continued through the school, Izuku slowly ate the food he had been given. When they got out to the front, Power Loader directed them over to the support department. Once they arrived, everyone waited for Power Loader to unlock the front door. However, Power Loader paused and looked at Inko and asked, Ms. Midoriya, I mean no disrespect, but how exactly did you teach your son to view his father? Inko froze at the question. She wasn't expecting to be interrogated. Well, when my husband first left, he explained he was going to go look for a solution to Izuku's problem with his quirk. In the beginning, he would return every other day. Soon that was only twice a week. Then eventually once a month, then after a bit, he disappeared. He never texted, never called, and never came home. I thought he had abandoned our son because he saw Izuku as useless. A month before he died, he sent me a box full of his old college textbooks and some blueprints. I just shoved them into the closet and forgot about them, Inko explained, until I met Mei and you gave them to me, Izuku said, as he looked over his shoulder at his mom. Yes, Inko nodded in agreement. Power Loader nodded and locked the door. Thank you, Ms. Midoriya. You thought your husband had abandoned you, but you couldn't be further from the truth. You see, your husband was always working towards a solution for your son's quirk. It's just 2 years after he started working on the issue. He began to use less than savory means to get material to find the solution. He met with the wrong people. He did things he wasn't always proud of, but he kept working until he had a solution for his son. It was because of these people that he distanced himself from you. They were the kind of people that would use anything for leverage. Power Layouter stopped in front of room 6G. How do you know this? Izuku asked. Your father needed a safe place to work and someone that could help him build. We had crossed paths before and he came to UA to consult me. Principal Nezu met with him and offered him a safe place to work, as long as he acted as a teacher alongside me. Power Loader said. You knew my father? Izuku asked. He couldn't believe that his father had the chance to work alongside actual pro heroes. Yes, we became great friends. I and Principal Nezu were the only 2 people he would talk to about you too. He always said he loved you, Izuku, and he always wanted you to know what kind of man he was. He was the kind of man that would do anything to help his son become a hero. Power Loader pulled out the key to the room and handed it to Izuku. This was your father's classroom. In the last few months before he died, he spent most of his time there. We have no idea what he was building. All we knew was it was for you. Izuku nodded, then leaned forwards and slid the key into the lock. He looked at the lock. Everything he knew about his father was wrong. His father loved him and sacrificed his life to keep Inko and Izuku safe. He had left his life's work to his. Izuku took a deep breath and then twisted the key. After a few seconds, nothing happened. Thanks, Dad. You left me with a broken and permanently locked door. Izuku sighed. Handprint verification. A British-sounding voice said. What? Everyone said. None of them was expecting this. Power Loader and Principal Nezu looked at each other. Did you know about this? They asked at the same time. Handprint verification. The voice asked again. Izuku looked around the door but didn't find any kind of scanner. Mei suddenly leaned forwards, her face getting close to one of the sections of the door. She suddenly grabbed Izuku's hand and held it across the door. What are you doing? Izuku asked, but he had no strength to pull his hand out of Mei's grip. Suddenly the piece of the door grew a light blue and hummed. Handprint verified. Welcome, Izuku Midoriya. 2 more handprint verification needed. Everyone tilted their heads in confusion. I'm guessing either myself, Principal, or Ms. Midoriya, Power Loader said. Izuku withdrew her hand and Inko pressed her hand against the door. Handprint verified. Welcome, Ice Princess. 2 more handprint verification needed. Ice Princess? Izuku asked. He looked up and saw that Inko had a small grin on her face, as if she was thinking about distant memories. Your father used to call me that because he said my stare was cold as ice. I'm in the system but not authorized. Inko said. Your husband must have not thought you would be here at the opening, Power Loader said, offering an explanation. Principal Nezu walked forwards and scanned his paw. Handprint verified. Welcome, Tic Tac. Nezu began to chuckle. That's what your father called me when we first met. He said I looked like a white tic-tac. One more handprint verification needed. Everyone looked at Powerloader. He was the only obvious person left. I guess that means me. Powerloader walked forwards and scanned his hand. Handprint verified. Welcome, Point Break. Powerloader was fully ready to break down the door. He had his fist and said, Diamenu Sutaku. Inko started chuckling, while Powerloader had murder in his eyes. I always hated Hisashi's nicknames. Powerloader tapped his fingers against the screen, causing small cracking. He knew he was going to break something later, but for now, he was satisfied. The door hissed and began to split apart, sliding to allow access. Inko grabbed a hold of Izuku's wheelchair, however, he stopped her. He grabbed the bars on the wheels and rolled himself in. He rolled into a pitch-black, dusty room. Izuku felt like he was breathing in dirt, with all of the dust that was in the room. Izuku coughed, then waved in front of his face. It's dusty. Well, it has been boarded up for a while. Powerloader pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. It didn't matter too much, as the dust caught most of the light. Now we just have to find the light SWCH. Everyone else pulled out their phone and used the flashlight and began to look for the light SWCH. I can't even use my quirk here, the dust blocks everything. They complained, coughing on some dust. I believe I have some that may help with the dust situation. Principal Nezu pulled out his phone and began typing. After a few minutes, the sounds of air conditioning filled the room. Hold your breath and close your eyes, Powerloader said. Within a few seconds, it felt like a mini sandstorm had entered the room. The air conditioning pushed the dust around until it slowly flowed out of the open door. After a few minutes, the dust storm had disappeared and May was quick to find the light SWCH. She FLC-ed it up and the ceiling light FLC-cured to life. Some were burnt out, but enough light was provided by those that still worked. Everyone looked around and saw it was a regular classroom, with a few desks and chairs pushed up towards the front of the room. So this is what my father left me, an empty, dusty old classroom. I'm a little disappointed. Izuku sighed. He didn't know what he was expecting, but he was hoping for a bit more. Beginning, track 1. The voice said, and 4 hidden projectors came to life. They were pointed at the center of the room. When an image came into focus, Inko recognized it was Hisashi. Hisashi, Inko said, Hello, my dear. I'm afraid this is a mere recording that I have left behind in the chance that I am killed before I am able to explain anything. The hologram said, then turned and looked at Izuku, my son. I am proud that you were able to make it to UA, and no matter which course it was, whether it was hero and support, I am proud that you followed your dreams of becoming a hero. Izuku rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment. Thanks, Dad. I'm sure Powerloader and Principal Nezu have explained a bit of what I did here. The kind of people I met and the things I did. If they haven't, please locate track 68. But know that everything I did was in hopes of being able to help you. The hologram of Hisashi paused. Would you like to play track 68? The voice asked. No, continue with track 1, Izuku said, and the hologram resumed. You are currently standing within classroom 6G, my own room that I used to teach and invent. I used many means to get a hold of machinery to invent new things, but not all were through legal means. Principal Nezu and Powerloader were generous enough to keep their mouths shut, but as I continued my work, the HPSC began to poke their heads into my work. And if they learn what I invented or the means I got the material for them, I would have never got the chance to finish it. I did all I could to make sure they or anyone with ill intention could never find my work. The vault's doors were merely the first step of security. To find the rest, I have a simple question for you, Izuku. What is the greatest kind of weapon? Izuku thought for a moment, then remembered something he used to hear his father say. While most people would say the kind you never have to fire out, you disagree. You always prefer the weapon you only have to fire once. The hologram of Hisashi smiled. As walls and floor tiles began to shift, everything an inventor would ever need began appearing in the room. Let me be the first to welcome you to Candle. Now become the hero I know you can be. Welcome to your hero academia. The hologram of Hisashi disappeared and May fell over to the floor. Oh my god, she muttered over and over again. I think her motherboard got fried, Izuku said, noticing the concerned look on his mother's face. Powerloader looked around the room. He had stars in his eyes. You're lucky you're dead, Hisashi. Can't believe you were hiding this from me. Holo tables, industrial 3D printers and scanners, artificial intelligence. Hello, my name is Jebisu. The voice introduced himself. I was created by Mr. Hisashi Sutaku to help handle the large amount of data generated from his many projects. My last instruction given to me by him was to help one Izuku Midoriya, the one he referred to as his son, Jebisu. What exactly was my father working on for me? Izuku asked. Accessing Project Hero Armor, Jebisu said. And the holo table FLC curd. A model of suit armor similar to Crimson Dynamo floated above the holo table. It was slim and barely taller than the average teenager. Everyone looked over the design. Izuku noticed the armor had repulsor on the palms. What exactly was Project Hero Armor? created by Hisashi Sutaku. Project Hero Armor was an advanced exoskeleton housing and multifunctional internal weapons system, more compact than anything military branches had, all protected by an external plated armor designed to be worn and act as a weapon and shield. Jabisu stated. Is this design manipulable? Izuku asked. Yes, Jabisu said. Izuku raised his finger and pinched the outer layer of the armor with his thumb and index. He moved his hand to the side and the armor followed it, leaving the weapons system and exoskeleton together. Izuku quickly separated those, leaving the three main components of the suit by themselves. The exoskeleton looked extremely familiar to Izuku. Hey Mei, what does that look like to you? Mei looked over the exoskeleton, then her eyes went wide. That looks like your boots and gauntlets. The repulsor technology is identical. Mei looked at the armor and weapon system. It seems like your father had more plans than we thought. The holograms were extremely detailed and Izuku almost felt he should call it a work of art. Jabisu, did my father have a working prototype of this suit? Records state Hisashi Sutaku constructed a working prototype. However, he ran into an issue of power source. Jabisu said as the center chest piece of the armor glowed a bit, indicating where the power source was supposed to go. What do you mean records state? Are you unable to locate the files? Mei asked. I have checked my databases and found mention of the files. However, the files were recently corrupted, Jabisu stated. How recent? Powerloader asked. He had a sick feeling in his gut. Files were corrupted 25 hours, 7 minutes and 45 seconds ago. Jabisu stated. Powerloader cursed under his breath then said, that's when the break-in happened. Someone used the chaos to break in and hack into our servers. Principal Nezu raised his hand. Jabisu, are you linked to the main UA servers? Yes. However, my main files are only accessible under Hisashi Sutaku's login. My senses registered his login being used 25 hours and 8 minutes ago. The UA staff computers located and copied files for Project Hero Armor. After files were copied, a virus was released and corrupted most files relating to the project. Can you show us what is left of the corrupted files? Izuku asked. The three components moved to the side. Then the holotable was filled with broken images. Izuku recognized a bit of the repulsor in the hover boots. So what I have left of my father's work with several 1,000 gigabytes of corrupted data. I won't state that. Powerloader raised his hand and began sifting through the corrupted data. The history of the files are still recorded, meaning some reference to your father's work remains. If none did, then Jabisu wouldn't know about Project Hero Armor. So you simply have to find what's left. Powerloader located a file that was barely corrupted. It was marked as Mark I, and work from there. Mark I looks like I'm starting from the beginning. Izuku said. Jabisu, delete all corrupted files, leaving only Mark I behind. Powerloader said the corrupted files disappeared, leaving only the file Mark I left. Open Mark I file. The file covered the holotables, a bit corrupt and strong to examine. However, the main files of the exoskeleton and the armor were fine. The weapon system was hazy. Yes, you're starting from the beginning, the very beginning. Thank you, Powerloader, and you too, Principal Nezu. Thanks to you, I can begin to understand what my father was doing. Izuku turned his chair and looked up at Powerloader. Now what did you mean by keeping me safe? Powerloader took a few moments before he spoke. Because of your actions during the hero exam. Your repulsors got damaged, causing you to lose your ability to gain points. However, your actions against the 0 point, the fact you were doing so to recuse a now hero student, impressed several teachers. Your score was still too low to be considered, so now you're in the support class. I talked with the hero teachers and they agreed that if you managed to impress them during the sports festival, and then pass the hero midterm exam, you could be transferred to the hero course. Izuku's eyes beamed at Powerloader's words. I wanted to give your father's notes in hopes that it could help you towards that goal. This flash drive doesn't hold as much as the servers did, but I wanted to help you as much as possible. Powerloader pulled out the flash drive and hung his head low. Izuku could see the sadness through Powerloader's mask. Izuku gripped the armrest of his wheelchair and hauled himself to his feet. Inko moved to help him, but Izuku raised a hand to stop her. My father worked to the end of his life to do all that he could to help me. Now most of his work is corrupted, so I'm willing to accept any form of help I can get. I don't care how little that flash drive holds. If it will help me, I'll use it to the best of my ability. Powerloader met Izuku and for a second saw the same confident smile that Hisashi always wore when he got something to work. My father built this by himself and it took him years. This time it should go by much more quickly with 3 people working together. Powerloader smiled then said, wait, 3 people? Who's the third? Izuku pointed over his shoulder at Mei, who had yet to take her eyes off the hero armor. She was studying the details of the exoskeleton. She won't forgive me if I don't allow her to help. Powerloader looked at the devilish look Mei had on her face. She looked ready to kill something. I think that would be for the best. Mr. Midoriya, I look forward to seeing you continue your father's work, Principal Nezu said. And while this room is no longer in use, it is still technically a classroom and can only be used after school hours with the proper authorization. How about we move this conversation to my office where we can fill out the proper docs to allow you to have access to this room. Not like anyone besides Midoriya will be able to get into this room. Powerloader mumbled under his breath. He hated that Principal Nezu made everything be done responsibly even when it was absolutely unnecessary. I'm sorry, what was that? Nothing, sir, Powerloader said. Principal Nezu nodded, then turned and headed towards the door. Oh, Mr. Midoriya, I believe you should withdraw Ms. Hatsum from the holo table. She seemed to be in a trance of some kind. Izuku looked over and saw Mei's eyes starting to glaze over. Izuku wheeled himself over and grabbed her hand. Hatsum. She made no movement. Izuku raised his hand and snapped his fingers in front of her eyes. Still no movement. Izuku sighed. He had done this a million times before. Whenever Mei got hyper-focused on something, the world around her disappeared and it was up to Izuku to basically turn her off and turn her back on. Izuku pinched Mei's nose close, then held a hand over her mouth. A few seconds went by, and then Mei's eyes bulged. She began to try to pry Izuku's hand off her face. But Izuku held for a few more seconds then finally let go. You nearly made me pass out this time. Mei yelled. Better to teach you then, Izuku said. Whatever. The group made their way to Principal Nezu's office where they signed the permission slip for Izuku to have access to Classroom 6G. Compared to where he was only a few months ago, Gaizan Hisahito could say being at UA was a massive improvement for him. He was finally going to a normal school, just not for a normal reason, and it had been easy to get in, despite what Gaizan had heard. The entrance exam was quite easy. It was made easier that Gaizan's quirks did help a bit so he didn't take damage from the robots, and he was able to destroy most of them with only a few punches. And with all the training he had as a kid, he was able to handle himself and not get distracted as many examinees he passed did so. He didn't second-guess himself or his action. As soon as the bell sounded, he drove headfirst to find his first point. Then came the zero-pointer. It was easy to see why no one ever went after it. It was as tall as some of the buildings and looked powerful. Though Gizo always loved a challenge, he built up as much energy as he could falling as building, and while his punch didn't match the zero-pointers, the energy Gaizan gained but blocking it. Gaizan happily returned the favor and returned the force upon the zero-pointer, ripping its entire arm off. That along with all the villain and rescue points, Gaizan easily got the top spot in the ranking and generated that Gaizan could leave his old life in the dark. Though he wasn't the only one, he heard an examinee from a different group had also destroyed their zero-pointer. However, when Gaizan asked his fellow classmates of 1A and those of 1B, none claimed to be the student that had done so, which he found strange. He wasn't boasting he had been the second student to do so. He figured at least one student would claim to be the other one, even if they were lying. Then came Mr. Aizawa's quirk assessment, and Gaizan immediately knew that while the threat of expulsion was false, Mr. Aizawa was more than ready to make good on it. Though Gaizan couldn't figure out on what basis Mr. Aizawa was truly grading everyone. And along with that, Gaizan started to butt heads with two of his fellow students. The first was Minoru Mineta, and the fact he was ogling the girl every time he looked over at him. That was something Gaizan decided to put off for later. The second was Katsuki Bakugo, and it came after the throw. Gaizan was called out by Mr. Aizawa for holding back with his quirk, something that Bakugo didn't seem to like as Gaizan had nearly matched his score. Bakugo rushed Gaizan and looked ready to attack. And as Gaizan shifted to defend himself, Mr. Aizawa used his capture tool to restrain Bakugo. Seeing the yellow goggles under Mr. Aizawa's scarf, Gaizan recognized him as the pro hero Eraserhead. Though he stayed silent about identifying his teacher for personal reasons, Mr. Aizawa threatened to give Bakugo detention if he acted. While Gaizan saw an opportunity to give Mr. Aizawa what he wanted, Gaizan turned to Mr. Aizawa and said, "Actually, I don't mind. It would help with my quirk." That got everyone's attention, confused about what Gaizan was getting at. Mr. Aizawa looked at Gaizan, who shrugged his shoulders and then nodded. Bakugo grinned as Mr. Aizawa released him. "You're even better than the DMN nerd. You know your place. Just not in the face," Gaizan said as he stepped back from Bakugo. "I do whatever the hell I want," Bakugo said as he lifted his hand and unleashed an explosion right in Gaizan's face. Bakugo expected Gaizan to fall backwards onto the ground, but he just waved the smoke away. He then calmly held out a hand for a new that Mr. Aizawa tossed to him. Gaizan then returned around and shifted into a pitcher's stance, then took a small step forwards and threw. It sailed through the air, and Gaizan knew it was going to go further than Bakugo threw, as though Bakugo's attack wasn't as strong as the one he used to throw. The Gaizan had a workaround, and didn't even look when Mr. Aizawa showed off his score. "Thanks for the assist," Gaizan said, then walked back to the rest of the class. He couldn't figure out why, but he could feel Bakugo glaring into his soul. He wasn't the only one to beat Bakugo's throw. Momoye Urazu blew all of their scores out of the water. Though as Gaizan stood there, he figured it out. Bakugo was like so many that Gaizan had met over his life. The only thing he cared for was his quirk. He only cared if it was powerful, and the most powerful, and what Gaizan had just done showed that Bakugo's quirk did nothing to him. Gaizan would have to get Bakugo out of that mindset, or it could lead to a dangerous path, one that Gaizan saw destroy lives. However, that is not to say it was going to be easy, as Bakugo returned the favor during All Might's first class. And while all of his classmates cheered at being able to meet the symbol of peace, Gaizan just gave a small clap. Even now Gaizan could still remember the power he had held for a split second. He had faced Bakugo by himself, leaving Ochako Uraraka to deal with Tenya Ilda. Gaizan held Bakugo in combat long enough that Bakugo was smart enough to know he had to SWCH from fighting Gaizan to try and get back to defending the bomb. That told Gaizan that Bakugo wasn't as far gone as he thought. However, Gaizan wanted to win the exercise and became like a brick wall and kept Bakugo from retreating too far. Within the last minute, Bakugo chose to retort to his grenade-shaped gauntlet. Not wanting to let the explosion damage the building too much, Gaizan got close and took the attack near point-blank range. He was thrown back and through several walls, before after catching his breath and pulling himself out of a hole in the wall, Gaizan landed on his foot with a thud that shook the entire building. Imbuing his quirk with all the energy he had absorbed, Gaizan pulled off his burning UA gym shirt and faced Bakugo. With his eyes glowing and a golden biblical light forming around him, Gaizan shifted his weight to launch himself back in Bakugo. With a yell, Gaizan pushed off the ground and was flying straight towards Bakugo. Yet that push was enough to put too much staring on Gaizan's body and mind. And just as he was about to throw the punch, Gaizan passed out and fell to the ground. When he woke, he had been informed his team had lost. Ochako explained from her perspective the entire building pulsed yellow, then the floor began to disintegrate. This caused everyone to lose their footing and fall to the ground floor, resulting in Ochako not reaching the bomb in time. Gaizan was ticked, of course, but soon that was in the back of his mind. But winning one hero class wasn't that important to his end goal, so his mind focused elsewhere, and soon the day was at the back of his mind. The next day started with the class voting for the class president and vice president. Many people had voted for him, bringing up how he had acted during All Might's class, his quick decision-making, and how it led to a heroic stand against a villain. He thanked them, but he quickly handed it over to Ilda, making Tenya Ilda class president and Momoye Urazu vice president. Gaizan was confident in his choice to hand over the responsibility to Ilda, even more so with how he handled the panic during lunch. The announcement of the break-in sent everyone into panic. Yet as Gaizan wasn't too concerned, he didn't get up from his chair and continued to eat his lunch. He listened as Ilda announced it was the media, and everyone slowly went to their classroom. He continued to eat his lunch until lunch was supposed to be over, and then went back to class 1 for heroic. In the classroom, he just nodded to Ilda and then headed over to his desk. And now a week later, Class 1 was heading to an out-of-campus training faculty. As the class rode a bus, everyone talked about how they were excited about rescue training. However, Gaizan was still thinking about how the media could have gotten through the UA gate. The gate hadn't simply been destroyed. It looked like parts of it had been disintegrated. "Your quirk is a lot like All Might," Tsuyu suddenly said, pulling Gaizan from his thoughts. It took a moment for Gaizan to realize she was talking to him. What are you talking about? "My quirk is nothing like All Might's," Gaizan said as he looked down the middle aisle at Tsuyu. "You both seem to have extreme super strength from seemingly nowhere," Tsuyu said as she stared back at Gaizan. The other WANA members stopped their conversation to listen to Gaizan's response. "Tsuyu," Gaizan began. "I told you to call Tsu," Tsuyu said, cutting Gaizan off. Gaizan sighed, then spoke with more conviction. "Tsuyu, I can promise you All Might and my quirk are nothing alike. Though that would be cool, they are not." Though Gaizan was curious how close he could get to that statement. His quirk could hold a lot of energy, so maybe seeing how he compared to All Might might help with a personal matter. Yeah, you both have super strength, but All Might's quirk doesn't do that little light show or cause him to pass out from overuse. Though you're manly for withstanding Bakugo's attack last week, Kirishima said as Bakugo growled. Gaizan noticed Todoroki giving him a bit of a side eye, but he didn't give it much attention. What the son of the number 2 hero could be thinking, Gaizan wanted no part in. If Todoroki was anything like his father, Gaizan was fine with staying as classmates and nothing else. Still, you've got a flashy quirk that will help you become a popular pro hero. Along with Bakugo and Todoroki, you've 3 got pro hero material quirks. There's not much I can do with a simple hardening quirk, Kirishima said, holding up an arm and his forearm turning into rock. It earned you a spot in Japan's #1 hero school, so it got to be worth something. You can become the ultimate shield. Nothing will be able to get past you, Gaizan said as he looked over at Kirishima's arm. "Quiet down, we're here," Mr. Aizawa said. After a minute, the bus slowed down to a stop and everyone filed off the bus. Now Gaizan was standing in front of the unforeseen simulation joint. Ochako asked why he wasn't wearing his hero costume, something he hadn't also worn during training yesterday, despite everyone having chosen to wear their costumes. However, before he could answer them, 13 had walked out, causing Ochako to start bouncing. Gaizan had to place his hand on her shoulder to hold her down and make her stop jumping. I can't believe it's 13. She's my favorite hero. I can't believe she's going to teach us, Ochako said. She was still bouncing under Gaizan's hand, but not as much. Welcome Class 1 to the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, otherwise known as the USJ, 13 said, giving a small bow. Gaizan couldn't help but compare it to Universal Studios Japan and wonder if they had ever sued. Movie companies were quite protective of their image. Now before we begin, there is a thing I would like to say. Okay, maybe 2 or 3, actually, 13 said, and Gaizan internally groaned as the number got bigger, but eventually 13 made her point about how quirks could be dangerous and heroes all have to know when they limit their quirks and manage control over it. Gaizan couldn't help as he had some personal experiences about losing control over his quirk and seeing it multiple times, people gaining quirks and having to struggle having to learn how to control them. Power was dangerous. Power left unchecked was disastrous. Power left uncontrolled was detrimental to the user. With her warning over, 13 continued with, I can't wait to show you what's inside. Follow me. The students of Class 1 followed the 2 pro heroes inside. Inside there were several different environments. Hiroshima commented it looked like an amusement park. Inside the USJ you will find many different environments that can be caused by natural disasters or villain attacks. Shipwrecks, landslides, fire and deep caverns are just a few that can be found here. This facility was created to teach how to handle these environments during rescue operations. While many heroes focus on combat and fighting, recuse is just as important. Quirks can be used in many different ways, some you may never have thought of. Mr. Aizawa's assessment taught you where your current power level is. All Might Hero class will teach you how to fight against those who seek to harm others. Here in my class, you will learn how it feels to fight against Mother Nature. And here I thought it wasn't nice to mess with Mother Nature and her judgment, Gaizan said, earning a few chuckles from the students that heard him. Gaizan decided not to tell them about how he had crossed paths with a woman whose quirk gave her control over the earth and she was known as Mother Nature. Mr. Aizawa looked around the entrance and noticed that someone was missing. He turned to 13 and whispered, "Where's All Might? I thought he was supposed to be here waiting for us." 13 turned to Mr. Aizawa and leaned in. With all of Class 1 is still taking in the sights, she whispered. Apparently he used up all of his time on the way to work this morning. It was all over the news, 20 different incidents within an hour. That man is the height of responsibility. Fine, so where is he right now? Mr. Aizawa knew the only reason All Might was supposed to be here was because Principal Nezu suspected a villain was behind last week's break-in. The official report was a person within the media, but as admitting to being the one that destroyed the gate would mean losing jobs and reputation, all of the new outlets said they were silent about it. But there was even worse news as Principal Nezu shared with the teacher that the break-in had been to steal information. The assailant had hacked into the server of an old teacher who had a hand in most of UA. Besides that, Mr. Aizawa didn't bother with details. He's resting in the teacher's lounge. 13 answered in a hushed tone. Good, Principal Nezu should be able to easily find him then. He deserves the long-winded lecture he has coming. Mr. Aizawa smiled a bit before. If there was one thing no one from UA wanted to deal with was sitting through a 2-hour lecture from the mouse. Mr. Aizawa heard from Present Mike in midnight that his lecture was boring enough they wanted to sleep but just interesting enough that they could. Mr. Aizawa was pulled from his thoughts as a cold shiver went down his spine and he began to look around for it. Mr. Aizawa's eyes darted over to his student, and he noticed Gaizan was stealthily looking around too. Had Gaizan noticed the feeling too? But he was only 15, how were his senses that attuned? Question for later as Mr. Aizawa found the source of the cold feeling. A purple swirling cloud formed in the middle of the main courtyard between the different environments. Class 1 finally noticed and a few of them took a step forward to get a better look, while Gaizan took a step back. Gaizan couldn't believe it. He couldn't have possibly found him. Gaizan had erased everything and did well to hide his track as he had done it before. Then again he owed the man a large debt and the man was patient and not the forgiving type. Gaizan looked over at his classmates. Why couldn't the man have just picked him off the street? Gaizan could easily lose him in the streets. But in the middle of a new building surrounded by people who had gotten to know Gaizan Hisahito, his disappearing act won't work too well. Wow is the beginning of training. UA is so manly, they go all out for everything, Hiroshima said as he and Mina looked down the stairs. This isn't by UA hands, Mr. Aizawa said. Principal Nezu had been right. The break-in had been caused by a villain. And it was more than just a one-time thing. Had it been a warning, a calling card. Yet why attack the USJ? To to make a statement when the timing couldn't have been guessed. Mr. Aizawa realized what the true purpose of the break-in was. It had been a distraction to steal a class schedule, allowing the villains to plan around the best place and deal to sneak in an attack whoever was behind the operation. This was not their first time. Suddenly Gaizan stepped forward, with an aura that he knew what he had to do, and Mr. Aizawa saw the look in his eyes. He was acting because he had better judgment. Yet how could he know how serious the situation was? Yet Gaizan knew how serious the situation was, probably better than anyone else in the building. If that man had decided to come after Gaizan, then Gaizan had to keep his focus on him and stay one step ahead of him. Gaizan grabbed Kirishima's neck and Mina's collar and pulled them back. "Whoa, Hisahito, what are you doing? Those are just actors." Gaizan sighed. Of course, none of them would truly understand what was happening. Even if they were just actors, we would need to treat them like villains. Gaizan then let go of Mina and Kirishima and grabbed Shiro and Kaminari's shirt. If they're villains, then where is the alarm? Shiro asked as he looked up at Gaizan, who had a cold look in his eyes. Before Mr. Aizawa could explain the importance of a sneak attack not being interrupted by an alarm, Todoroki beat him to it. They must have picked this location in time because they knew a class would be here, Todoroki said. It was a smart play if they were looking to cause some damage. The only pro heroes were Eraserhead and 13. The villains wouldn't want to be interrupted by more teachers showing more. Real villains would have a way to deal with the alarm. Technology or quirk base, honestly it doesn't matter. They would want to make sure their arrival wasn't interrupted. If the alarm was tripped, then their whole plan would be over before it began. We're only 10 minutes from the main campus, and some of the UA hero teachers can move faster than a bus. If an alarm was tripped, this would all be over before they would do any damage, Gaizan said, now showing no fear as he exhaled a deep breath. Mr. Aizawa looked at Gaizan as if he wouldn't have been able to explain it any better. Gaizan was a smart student. The way he had acted during the first week of class told that much. He had a strong quirk and knew how to use it, but he was also quick to assess different situations and break them down. However, Gaizan wasn't speaking as if he read that somewhere in a textbook. No, he was speaking as if that was how he would plan something like this, as if he had first-hand experience. As if this was how he was planning an attack on the USJ. Mr. Aizawa shook that thought and refocused on the purple cloud. It quickly expanded and people began to walk out. None of them looked all too intimidating, just some low-level street thugs. Yet in the middle of the USJ were over 200 of these thugs, which could cause some issues. None of the WANA students had training against other people. Some know how to effectively use their quirks. But against test dummies and actual people was a big learning curve. Eventually, the purple cloud expanded even more and a large entity walked out. The first one was a large figure, muscles bulging all over its dark purple body. It had a large open beak mouth, with its brain exposed. It gave off a demonic and twisted aura that almost made Mr. Aizawa want to throw up. Mr. Aizawa always noticed despite not seeing them. Gaizan took a small step back. Before Mr. Aizawa could think about his student's action, a second large entity walked through the purple cloud. It was different from the beaked monster. The second creature looked like a giant metal suit of armor. It had a clear sign of an exoskeleton, making it clear it could easily move. The question was how fast. It stood nearly as tall as the other figure. It had glowing white eyes, and it scanned the group of students as if it were looking for something. Finally, a person covered in gray hands walked out of the cloud. As soon as the man stepped out, Gaizan took a small step back. He had seen the man before and seen what he was capable of, but Gaizan knew he needed to hold his ground. Once the man was clear, the purple cloud shrunk and morphed into the shape of a man wearing a standard butler attire. "Everyone has passed through, sir. We're ready to begin," the purple cloud said in a monotone voice that benefited its attire. "Good." The man covered in his hands spoke in a dry tone as he looked up at the group atop the stairs. "I don't see All Might. MSTR said he would have been put over these students after the break-in. My scanners aren't picking him up. Only 13 and Eraserhead," the giant metal man said, his voice booming over the crowd, making him sound like a villainous All Might, though the monster beside him seems to hold the power. The man began to scratch viciously at his throat. "This whole job was to kill the symbol of peace, and he isn't even here. We were supposed to be able to beat the game after the tutorial, but the final boss isn't even here. I didn't join your little band of thugs just to waste my time," the giant robot said, looking down at the man covered in hands. "You promised everything was going to go according to the plan. Your MSTR said Nezu would add All Might to the roster, out of fear because of the break-in. Yet I don't see him anywhere. I'm putting a lot on the line for this. We aren't wasting our time. If we can't kill the symbol of peace, then we'll just stop the next generations of heroes." The man yelled, "Attack." All the thugs began to rush forward. "Kirigiri, time for you to do your job." "Yes, sir." The purple cloud of a man collapsed on himself, disappearing. "Class, you need to get out of here. This is no place for children," Mr. Aizawa said, pulling his goggles over his eyes. "You're only first years. This is not your fight. You against over 200 thugs, Gaizan said, out of everyone in Class 1A. He needed to prove himself the most. He wanted to prove he could be a hero despite what his father wanted. Mr. Aizawa, your quirk is best suited for sneak attacks, not prolonged battles. Rule number 1 about being a hero: you can't just have one trick. Mr. Aizawa took out and leapt down the flight of stairs. As he rushed towards the villain below, he began picking out his targets in the order in which it was most efficient to take them out. Gunners, aim and fire, one of the thugs said, raising their hand which had barrels of guns for fingers. He tried to activate his quirks, but nothing happened. My quirk. It's gone. What happened? Mr. Aizawa came crashing down on the thug, his knee pressing into the thug's head. The thug was instantly knocked out and Mr. Aizawa fell to the ground, but quickly hopped back on and landed on his face. He looked around, gauging which thugs were going to take the most time. Idiots, that eraser had. His quirk allows him to block quirks, the metal giant informed the group of thugs. Not that it could do them much good. Heroes were trained to fight with a disadvantage, as a smart villain would know a hero's quirk before fighting them. Interesting, but I bet your quirk doesn't work on a heteromorphic like me. A man whose skin was gray and black rock charged forwards. He had his fist drawn back and ready to attack the hero. You're right. Mr. Aizawa gripped his scarf and threw it out. One from the heteromorphic would easily do damage, and with all the other villains surrounding him, Mr. Aizawa didn't want to get jumped and kept down. As the scarf reached the villain, it wrapped itself around the heteromorphic's torso. Mr. Aizawa spun around, using the thug as a recce, before pulling him in close and ramming his elbow in the thug's nose, knocking him out. That's why I only allow people like you close when I want. All right, who's next? Mr. Aizawa looked over at the crowd of thugs in front of him. It was going to take a strong nap after this, not just for having to deal with all this, but to step up and cover All Might. If he wasn't exhausted from Principal Nezu's lecture, even if the number 1 hero was tired from the lecture, Mr. Aizawa would give him an earful and a lecture about how as a teacher his first responsibility was to his student, not to the media or his public image, but to his students, to teach them and to protect them. For many reasons, some wanted to help, others wanted a chance to let loose, the rest just watched to watch as Mr. Aizawa fought. All of Class 1 was still standing at the top of the stairs looking down. They were all impressed as Mr. Aizawa easily took care of the thugs, moving to the next before the one had hit the ground. All the while Gaizan and were trying to get them to step back from the stairs. Yet they were all entranced by the fight to move. Mr. Aizawa is manly. He's handling those villains like they're nothing, Kirishima said, as Mr. Aizawa knocked out a guy that had metal arms, then wrapped his scarf around a villain that was behind his back. Students, you need to get out of here right now. I'll be staying behind to assist Eraserhead. Now go. 13 said as Gaizan grabbed Kaminari's shirt and began to pull. But then Gaizan felt something was wrong and he mumbled, "No, we won't be able to escape. It's too late." Gaizan looked over the fight to see what was causing him to have that feeling, when he noticed that the purple cloud butler was missing. He had been the one to teleport all of the thugs into the USJ, causing Gaizan to begin desperately looking around for him. Gaizan couldn't find the purple cloud butler when he suddenly felt a cold chill coming from behind him. Gaizan turned around and came face to face with the purple cloud butler, who had a look of recognition on his misty face. And Gaizan has one too. He felt something familiar with the man in the gray hands, but with this teleporter, it was else. It was fearing death like from him, or caution from the man in the gray hands. But the purple cloud butler, Gaizan felt a feeling of entrapment. We're stuck. What do you mean? Momo asked, as she turned and looked at Gaizan as he took a small step forwards as if putting himself behind the class in something. Momo then noticed he wasn't looking down at the fight. Now he was looking at the short distance between the top of the stairs and the exit. Momo and several others followed Gaizan's line of focus, and just in time, a purple cloud appeared in the group. It slowly formed into the shape of a man, who was wearing a standard butler outfit. Black black vest over a white shirt. The only thing out of the ordinary was some kind of metal piece of armor that Gaizan barely noticed. The mist villain bowed in a formal fashion and said, "Hello, my name is Kurajiri and we are the League of Villains." Gaizan had to stop himself from laughing. He could never understand how stupidly people named themselves. "And we are here to kill All Might. However, it seems he is not in our presence. Yet that is not my job. My job is to divide you from your classmates." The purple cloud surrounding the villain's arms began to fly out. But before anything would happen, Bakugo and Kirishima launched themselves forwards. Bakugo lit off an explosion and Kirishima swung a strong punch. However, both attacks missed. "No, don't attack," Gaizan said. Getting close to a teleporter was one good way to allow the teleporter to use their quirk on you. "You talk too much," Bakugo said, preparing another explosion, while Kirishima got ready to throw another punch. However, the ground beneath their feet was suddenly replaced with purple mist and they fell through. Bakugo, Kirishima, their classmates yelled, though Gaizan was the only one to take action. He dove forwards, trying to grab hold of their hand. However, the portal closed before Gaizon could get close. Kurogiri lashed out at Gaizon, forcing the one student to jump back and do a reverse handspring to land next to 13, as she stepped forwards to protect the student. Now to deal with the rest of the students, Kurogiri said, and much more quickly this time. A portal appeared under the feet of the students. The ground below each student became covered in purple gas. Gaizon looked back to see several of his fellow students through. This distracted him enough that he began to fall through. Gaizon couldn't believe it as he fell through the portal. He had been training his life over to let down his guard. That was his #1 priority during a fight, was his life number. But had he always become attached to the class 1 that he forgot that? He had dived to try and save Bakugo and Kirishima. As Gaizon's chest went through the portal, he realized he had tried to save Bakugo and Kirishima. His first thought wasn't to protect himself. Then Gaizon's vision changed and he found himself falling into the landslide hazard zone, which was filled with thugs. Gaizon always knew he had a high chance of dying young, but he wished it wasn't by the hands of low-level thugs. As Gaizon got near the ground, he crossed his arm in front of him and hit the ground. Normally a person's arm would be destroyed, but as a cloud of dust went up and caught everyone's attention, Gaizon's arms absorbed the impact. He pulled himself out of the hole and saw cracks had formed around him. Then as Gaizon felt all eyes on him, he instantly shifted into a defensive pose, and just in time as the first thugs attacked him. Gaizon dodged the thug's knife. This was not the first time Gaizon had fought against someone with a knife, and the thug was no way near her level. So Gaizon easily grabbed the thug's wrist and twisted, forcing him to drop it, allowing Gaizon to kick the thug in the chest and send him flying. Gaizon was then caught off guard as a thug's with rock-covered hands punched Gaizon's across the jaw. Gaizon slid across the floor a bit, but the villain was quickly on top of him again. The thug decked Gaizon and went flying. Gaizon hit the ground and quickly got to his knee, and saw the thug coming towards him. He was ready this time, and as the thug kicked, Gaizon blocked the attack. Gaizon took the time to get on one leg, then blocked a punch. Gaizon got his other leg under him. The thug then drew back its right fist, and Gaizon quickly stood up and caught the fist. Gaizon's eyes glowed a bit yellow as he forced the thug's arm out of its socket, and Gaizon looked the thugs in the eyes. Gaizon saw fear enter his opponent's eyes. "You hit strong." Gaizon then roundhouse kicked the thug square in the chest and sent him flying. "I hit harder." Hisahito. Gaizon heard someone calling out and looked over and found Momo and Jiru defending themselves. Momo created a bow staff for herself while Jiru pulled a machete out of Momo's leg. Gaizon jumped over to them and shoulder-checked the thug away from Momo. "You were sent here too." Before Gaizon could say anything, the thug ran back in and tried to tackle Gaizon. Gaizon got in close and with a right hook made the villain stumble back. With the brief window, Gaizon Spartan kicked the villain away, then went shoulder to shoulder with Momo and Jiru. Gaizon looked around and said, "I'm glad I wasn't the only one sent here. If we're the only 3 here, then the others must have been sent something else." Kurogiri said his job was to divide us. This must be what he meant, divide and conquer. Our main focus should be getting back to the main plaza and hope the others are able to handle themselves. Momo deduced, and it was a smart plan. Divide the class 1 student among the groups and then overwhelm them with numbers. Thus the expert in battle moves the enemy, and is not moved by him, Gaizon said as he raised his hand to ready himself. The quick fight he had was good to fill his quirk with energy, and he was more than ready to return the favor. "Now is not the time to quote Sun Tzu," Jiru said. "Then how about this one? Know thy enemy. If our opponent knew me, they would be trying to restrain me, not fight me," Gaizon said as he looked around and noticed that the thugs were starting to move into position to attack. The initial skirmish is over, and even if they are cannon fodder, numbers still play a big part in battle. Gaizon counted over the crowd and counted 64 thugs left. He needed to get out of here, away from Kurogiri and the man in the gray hands. They felt so familiar, and that only meant one thing for Gaizon. "Come!" One the thugs yelled, and they all charged the trio. Momo and Jiru used their weapons to defend themselves, while Gaizon took a step forward to hold his ground. He was punched left and right, yet all that did was fill up his quirk. Once he had enough energy, Gaizon fought back. He sent thugs flying and then pulled them off of Momo and Jiru. Gaizon noticed their costume had rips and tears, showing the thugs only had one thing on their minds. Gaizon was a gentleman. He was always nice to women when he first met them, but if their attitude was not kind, he lost all respect for them. And Momo and Jiru had been nice to Gaizon since he met them. After Bakugo had destroyed his hero customer, Momo had offered to create him a new one. Gaizon respectively declined the offer as the costume wasn't what he was looking for in the first place, while Jiru had helped Gaizon find his way to his exam area and then to class 1 on the first day. So when Gaizon found men trying to have some fun with Momo and Jiru, he lost it. Jiru's jacket and belt had been torn off. Momo was having to cover herself. So he grabbed one of the larger thugs and lifted him into the air. It was time for prison rules, so Gaizon yelled, "Hey!" and as soon as he had all of their attention he slammed the large thug into the ground, breaking the ground with his face. Gaizan then stood up and said, "Leave them alone." All of the thugs look at Gaizan. He didn't look overimposing. He didn't have a figure like All Might, or an aura like Endeavor, though the thugs wouldn't have been any wiser as Gaizan knew how to hide his aura. Nor did it help that he was in a regular white t-shirt with an open jacket over it and a pair of gym briefs. The only thing that made Gaizan seem like a threat was he was taller than the average person from Japan. "You seem like a guy that would jump at a chance to join us," one of the thugs said, and Gaizan then gave a kind smile that hid his anger. Oh, how wrong they were. Gaizan was the last person that would fall to such temptation. Gaizan casually walked up to the thug that said then, and the next second his punch was punching the man's nose. The thug went flying back and down the mountainside. That was enough to get the rest gunning for Gaizan. Yet his main priority was not fighting, as he quickly weaved through the onslaught and came out now between the group of men and his classmate. Gaizan grabbed hold of Momo and Jiru, in a way not to make them feel uncomfortable, and jumped away. He landed a good distance away from the men and set the girls on the ground. Jiru noticed the state of Momo's costume, and despite Gaizan saying he wouldn't, Jiru didn't have much trust in men. So she moved to cover Momo's exposed chest, but then Gaizan, with his eyes closed, took off his jacket and DD'd over Momo. Gaizan then looked Momo in the eyes, and she expected Gaizan to say some comforting words, but then in a flat voice Gaizan asked for a smoke grenade. Gaizan asking Momo for a smoke grenade gave her something to focus on, besides what she had been caught in the middle less than 15 seconds ago. She pulled up the mental image of a smoke grenade and handed it to Gaizan. Gaizan took the smoke grenade and then nodded. He then stood up and faced the group of men. He noticed all of their attention was back on Momo and Jiru, something he did not take kindly to. Gaizan began walking back to the man, tossing the smoke grenade up into the air and catching it again. Once he was in range he yelled, "Hey, well, are you just a mommy's boy?" one of the thugs said. And with that Gaizan pulled the pin of the smoke grenade and threw it. The moment it hit the ground it exploded and Gaizan ran forwards. Before he ran into the smoke cloud, he scooped up the bow staff Momo made. Then he disappeared into the smoke cloud. From Momo and Jiru's perspective, the moment Gaizan disappeared into the smoke cloud, a flash of yellow light began to set off. Each flash of light was accompanied by the sound of flesh hitting flesh, and a body hitting the floor. A few villains tried to run out of the smoke cloud, so Momo and Jiru got ready to fight, but then they were pulled back into the cloud of smoke by an arm with a biblical light around it. 2 minutes after Gaizan disappeared, he walked out carrying the bow staff and dragging the man one had called Gaizan's a mommy's boy. Gaizan lifted the man in front of him and stared into the man's soul for a bit, as if telling the man how much he had messed up. Then with a yell Gaizan threw the man into the ground and cracks formed as the ground broke. Gaizan sighed and began walking back to the girls. When he was only 10 steps away, the ground behind him broke and a large villain wearing a skull mask grabbed Gaizan's head and lifted him into the air. Gaizan felt an electric pulse go through his body, and though he absorbed most of it, the feeling made his body go numb. Such defiance, acting as if he isn't like every other teenage boy. But with him now out of the way, I'll have you two all to myself, the skull mask villain said. Momo and Jiru tried to take a step back, but then the skull mask villain lifted it free hand and lighting sparked around it. Another move and I'll fry your so-called knight in white armor. Momo and Jiru froze and the skull mask villain laughed. The other underestimated class 1 of UA, but a mistake that ended in my favor. Once I've had my fill, I'll let Shigaraki kill you. Gaizan's mind froze as he heard the name of Shigaraki. When it couldn't be him, Gaizan had hidden himself from the world, the light and the dark. There was no way that that man had found him. Gaizan knew he was a patient man, but he was not one to go after a fruitless endeavor. Gaizan would have begun to shake out of fear, but his body was unable to move. He guessed that worked in his favor as it made the skull mask villain believe he was unconscious. The other started, but I will be the one to finish you two, and with nothing else in my way, I'm going to enjoy myself and take my time. The skull mask villain said as he began walking towards Momo and Jiru. Gaizan could see the fear in their eyes, though Momo hit her a bit better. Gaizan saw the skull mask villain begin to reach for Momo to pull off Gaizan's jacket. Gaizan's body decided that was enough and woke up, as Gaizan's arm shot up and broke the wrist of the hand that was holding Gaizan in the air. In the few seconds of the confusion and pain of the skull mask villain, Gaizan hit the ground and drew back his fist. He pulled all the rest of his quirk's energy into his fist and his arm gained a bright biblical glow. Gaizan saw the fear in the skull mask villain's eyes as he took a step forward and threw a punch that hit the skull mask villain's in the chest and sent him flying down the mountain. I despise those types of men above all else, Gaizan said. Then his shoulder dropped and he turned to the girls. Are you two all right? Neither of the girls said a thing as Momo hugged herself and Jiru felt like trying to make herself small as she fell to the ground. Momo gave a small nod as Jiru had small tears running down her cheeks. Neither of them liked how close they had gotten to being made into something less than what they were. Even though there was still much to do and the fighting was not over, Gaizan walked up to Momo and Jiru. He hugged Momo with right arm and put his left hand on Jiru's shoulder. "You did good. And you don't have to worry about them anymore." Gaizan felt the girls lean into his embrace, but then he made the mistake of looking down the hill. He should have kept his attention on comforting his classmates. But the moment he looked down the hill and saw the fighting was still going on, he couldn't focus on anything else. "We have to help everyone else," Gaizan said. As he let go of the girls and took a step towards the edge, "The fight isn't over, make your way down the hill. I'll go ahead to help out." Momo and Jiru looked over at Gaizan, thankful that he had rescued them and not wanting him to leave. But he was right. They might have been safe in their area, but the rest of their class was still out fighting for their lives. But they were confused of how Gaizan planned on going ahead of them. There was only one stairwell down the side of the mountain. Their question was answered as Gaizan jumped down the side of the mountain. He landed on a boulder, his quirk absorbing all the kinetic energy that he then used to rocket himself down the mountain. As Gaizan landed on the center of the courtyard, he saw Eraserhead had taken care of all of the thugs around him, leaving only the man in the gray hands and the two massive monsters. "I hate pro hero, more so when they live up to their reputation," the man in the gray hands complained, scratching his neck. He was watching Eraserhead, a pro hero known only to use sneak attacks and only fight small groups, easily handling the 200 thugs in the main plaza. "I'm surrounded by idiots," the metal man said. The man in the gray hands heard and was tempted to dust the suit of armor, leaving the man to his known devices. "MSTR gave you this opportunity to demonstrate your suit. Or, do you want me just to destroy it and throw you to the heroes?" The man in the gray hands said, viciously scratching his neck, leaving a red rash behind. "Fine, Shigaraki. I'll deal with your hero issue, since you seem to be waiting for your precious All Might to use your creature." The man sighed, and stepped forwards. He looked at Eraserhead, who readied himself, as his scarf turned around his neck and shoulders. Gaizan froze and focused on the man in the gray hands. The metal man had called him Shigaraki. That was impossible. The Shigaraki Gaizan knew it looked nothing like that. Had Shigaraki got a quirk that allowed him to change his look? No, the man Gaizan knew wouldn't make himself look like a young 20-year-old. The Shigaraki Gaizan knew would show off his age, showing that not even time could kill him. The Shigaraki that was in front of Gaizan had to be a son. No, that wasn't it. A disciple, that felt right. Someone the man had trained to be the face of the League of Villains, so he could remind the mastermind in the shadow. Time for the boss's minion, Eraserhead, looking at the giant metal man rushing towards him. Once he was a few feet away, Eraserhead activated his quirk. However, it did nothing to slow his opponent's speed. As an underground hero, Eraserhead had seen all different kinds of quirks, from quirks that turned people into the weirdest animals to quirks that were downright disgusting. So when Eraserhead had first laid eyes on the metal giant, he assumed it was a quirk that gave his opponent his appearance. However, the realization that it wasn't was quirk as soon as the metal monster lost no speed under erasure. The thought that it was some kind of suit crossed Eraserhead's mind as he felt the cold metal of a large fist bat him away. Eraserhead flew away, but before he could hit the ground, the suit ran up and caught him. Eraserhead was lifted up and then slammed into the ground, only to be kicked away this time. Eraserhead could feel his breath escape his lungs as he hit the ground and rolled. Once he stopped, he forced himself to catch his breath and slowly rose his head to see the hulking figure of the suit staring at him. Eraserhead could feel that his ribs were sore, a sure sign that once the adrenaline wore off he would be in a world of pain. He slowly got to his knees, then forced himself to get up onto his feet. Eraserhead's vision was fuzzy, but he saw the illuminated eyes looking right back at him. Eraserhead knew his quirk didn't improve his fight capabilities or his strength. However, against most other quirks users, Eraserhead was able to bring them down to his level. Yet against a machine like this, Eraserhead would have his work cut out for him. Impressive, you aren't dead yet. Unfortunately, that won't be true for much longer. The giant suit raised its palm. Plates shifted around, and air hissed, then an electric hum raised Eraserhead's eyes as the palm of the suit began to glow. Let's see how these work. Eraserhead stared down at the glowing palm, as his sense towards that he did not want to be on the end of what came out of that glow. He had a small belief that it was part of the man's quirk and he could cancel it, but chances were it was part of the suit. Even if it was the wearer's quirk, Eraserhead couldn't see his body and thus couldn't cancel his quirk. A short hum sounded off as the glow in the palm reached its peak, and then a beam of energy shot out. Eraserhead tried to dodge out of the way. However, a flash of pain shot through his body, leaving him unable to move. Eraserhead wasn't willing to accept defeat, not at a time his student needed him the most. However, as the beam got closer, Eraserhead knew there was nothing he could do. Suddenly, a figure landed right in front of him. The figure used its body to shield Eraserhead from the beam without a yell or scream. Yet Eraserhead closed his eyes and waited for a second. Inhale, another second, exhale. Eraserhead opened his eyes and found himself still alive. Eraserhead looked up and saw Gaizon with a golden biblical light around him standing his ground against the beam. As the beam hit Gaizon's chest, the glow around him grew until the attack shot and Gaizon slightly slumped forwards. The biblical glow condensed around Gaizon then completely disappeared. Gaizon's skin was then revealed to be badly burned. His white t-shirt was on fire and his gym breath were slowly burning away to be shorts. Eraserhead failed for his student, but then Gaizon's skin began to slowly heal until it was a normal tone of color. When Gaizon had seen Eraserhead engage the metal giant, he was ready for a one-sided smackdown. That's what he had seen, but wasn't in favor of the person he wanted. He watched as his favorite pro hero was easily tossed around and unable to defend himself. So when the palm of the metal giant began to light up, Gaizon knew he needed to engage, even if some secrets were revealed. So pouring all the energy he had gotten by jumping down the mountain into his leg, Gaizon rocketed towards Eraserhead. Gaizon landed about 6 feet in front of Eraserhead and held his ground. The moment the energy beam hit Gaizon in the chest, he felt his quirk begin to absorb the heat and kinetic force behind it. He felt his shirt begin to burn away and his skin began to heat up, so he allowed his quirk to leak out. As his body absorbed as much heat as possible, Gaizon let his quirk expel its energy through the biblical glow. Then it stopped, and Gaizon had to use all of his will to stay on his feet. He fought through the pain and forced his quirk energy to begin to heal his skin. He fought as his skin cooled off and became stitched back together. Then after a few seconds the pain was gone and Gaizon coughed out a small puff of smoke. He then stared down the metal villain and said, "Okay, oh, that hurt a lot more than I was expecting. How are you doing back there, Eraserhead?" That initial hit seemed to have some force behind it. "Hisahito, what are you doing?" Eraserhead couldn't believe his eyes. Gaizon's quirk file, while extremely vague, mentioned Gaizon being able to absorb energy and use it in different ways. However, it never mentioned Gaizon used his quirk's energy to heal himself. Gaizon's actions were irrational and dangerous, but he seemed to know what he could take and his action had saved Eraserhead. "Making sure my favorite pro hero doesn't get killed," Gaizon said as he looked over his shoulder at Eraserhead. "So how about you let me take this guy while you rest up?" Without waiting for a response, Gaizon turned around and walked towards the metal suit. As he walked, he ripped off the burnt remains of his gym shirt. "That was 2 shirts within 2 weeks. I've got some energy to burn." "Impossible. That blast was 50% strong. You should be a corpse now." The villain seemed to notice the healed skin. "You have hyper-regeneration, so that's how you were able to survive the blast." "Maybe, maybe not. The only thing that matters is you hurt my teacher. I'll return the favor tenfold," Gaizon said as his voice took a bit more serious tone, though not as much as he had when protecting Momo and Jiru. Gaizon suddenly stopped and shifted into an offensive stance as his eyes started to glow yellow. Before the metal villain had a chance to attack, Gaizon smiled and rushed forwards. With the built-up force from absorbing the blast, Gaizon's speed made him strong to track. However, the suit, or more specifically as Gaizon suspected, the sensors in the suit were able to track his speed. As soon as he got into reach, both hands of the suit clasped together and swung down like a hammer. Gaizon knew normally he would be able to tank the hit, but with all the energy he had absorbed from the energy blast, Gaizon knew his quirk was near its limit. And if he went over his limit, he would pass out and be defenseless. Not wanting that, Gaizon quickly sidestepped the attack and got in close, where the midsection of the suit was at the perfect height for Gaizon to land a strong punch. Gaizon planted his forward foot, directed his quirk's energy into his arm that it gained a yellow glow as he rotated into the punch. The hit landed and Gaizon felt the metal dent, then warp, then finally completely shatter under the force being exerted upon it. The rest of the suit felt the monument and went flying back. It hit the ground and began sliding, its massive figure leaving trenches as its weight carved out the ground. Once the suit stopped, it picked itself up with its part moaning under the weight. The head of the suit rose and looked at Gaizon, who was wearing a grin. "A weapon can be destructive and powerful, but if it's easily destroyed, then it's useless. I mean, just look at your suit. I mean, one well-placed punch and the integrity was completely destroyed. My strength might be above average, but your worthless suit of junk won't be able to face most top 50 heroes. You brat," the man from within the suit yelled, his voice coming over the speakers and from the hole Gaizon had just made. "I'll make you pay for that. You can make me try, but in the end you'll fail. I'll even let you get in a free hit," Gaizon said, holding his hands out to the side, as if enticing the villain to attack him. He had put all of his quirk's energy into his attack and could do it with a refill. Both hands of the suit raised and the palms hummed like before. Gaizon's eyebrow raised a bit. He had taken on 1 energy blast at once and survived, but he wasn't completely confident in taking on 2 at once. "Let's see how you deal with this, you brat," the suit yelled as 2 beams shot out of the palms. Gaizon dodged the attack and began running forwards to get to the suit. The beams forward Gaizon and he jumped over the first one, and as soon as he hit the ground he slid under the second one. Gaizon quickly got back on his feet and continued running towards the metal villain. As Gaizan ran his hand over the beam, his quirk absorbed all its heat and allowed Gaizan to speed up. As Gaizan got in close to the metal villain, he was prepared to have to dodge the beams of energy to get in close. But then the glowing eyes and the beams of energy went off. The sound of the suit losing power reached Gaizan's ears and told him he was good to attack. So Gaizan increased his speed and drop-kicked the metal suit away. Gaizan directed his attack to the hole he had already caused in the side of the suit. So as the suit hit the ground repeatedly as it skipped backwards, it began to break apart and pieces went flying. The suit rolled to a stop and was slumped over as it was sitting down in exhaustion. "I'm not finished," yelled the villain from within the suit, but then the armor over the arms began to disintegrate. Gaizan looked at the disintegration. It was the same what had happened to the front gate of UA. Gaizan had been ready. It wasn't the media but this Shigaraki. "Shigaraki, what are you doing? You were given a chance to demonstrate and you couldn't even kill a kid." Shigaraki walked around the suit, keeping his hand pressing against the suit, until all of the armor over the arms was gone. He then withdrew his hand and shook them as if trying to shake off dust. "I wasn't finished, Shigaraki," the man within the suit said with a distressed tone of voice. "MSDR says I can destroy whatever I want to and I didn't like your suit. However, MSDR seems to have plans for you." Kurogiri appeared next to Shigaraki. "What are you doing?" "Some students in 13 managed to dodge my initial attack. I managed to put 13 out of commission, but one of them managed to escape," Kurogiri explained. Shigaraki yelled, "If you weren't on our way out of here, I would kill you." Kurogiri teleports Mr. Sudin to MSDR. "I'll let MSDR deal with him. And Namu, deal with the student that's running up." With the metal suit villain out of the way, and the Shigaraki in front of him not being who Gaizan thought of, Gaizan knew he was a good attack. But as soon as he heard Shigaraki give that command, his eyes went wide. Despite running, his footsteps had been quiet. Training from his father always made sure Gaizan's footsteps were quiet. Yet somehow Shigaraki still heard him and gave Gaizan barely any time to see the large beaked creature move. It disappeared from Gaizan's sight only to reappear right in front of Gaizan. Gaizan's senses went wide as Namu's aura of uncontrolled chaos lifted the area around it. Gaizan slammed his feet into the ground in an attempt to stop himself, but Namu closed in. Namu then threw a punch and Gaizan's instinct saved his life and allowed him to jump over Namu. Gaizan quickly made a plan to attack Namu from behind, but before Gaizan had a chance to land, Namu turned and swatted him away. Gaizan barely had a chance to raise his arm to protect himself, and when Namu's massive purple fist rammed into Gaizan's arm, he knew he wouldn't be able to absorb all of the impact. Thinking fast, Gaizan absorbed as much as he could of the impact as possible, then allowed the rest of the force to send him flying. As soon as Gaizan hit the ground, he rolled, using his arms to protect his head until he came to a stop. Gaizan sat down breathless as he felt his quirk pushing against his body as it was at its limit. "Hisahito," the Racerhead said, forcing himself over to his student. Gaizan got to his knees and felt that his left arm was broken and his right was fractured. "Are you okay?" Gaizan spat out some BLD in his mouth as he stood up. "Peaky. That Namu must have a strength-enhancing quirk. His hits felt like All Mights." Gaizan looked at Namu and noticed that his punch had been powerful enough to also kick up dust. Gaizan knew he wouldn't be able to survive a punch like that unless his quirk was fully empty and about to absorb as much as possible. That's what Kurogiri must have meant when he said they came to kill All Might. That Namu, that creature, whatever is it, it's their weapon designed to kill All Might. His quirk must be as powerful as All Might. "No, he doesn't. I cancelled his quirk at the last second, yet it did nothing," Eraserhead said, though he didn't know why he was telling Gaizan this information. He was only a first-year high schooler. What could he possibly do against someone whose strength was on the level of All Might? Maybe it was because Gaizan had willingly stepped in to protect him, so maybe he deserved to know what he was up to again. No, Eraserhead needed to focus and get his student out of the way. Eraserhead, someone managed to get past Kurogiri. I heard him tell Shigaraki, but I don't know who. But if I had to guess, it would have been Ilda. He's the fastest out of us and I didn't see him get teleported. Chances are he's running to get a signal to the main campus, Gaizan said as he heard footsteps walking up to them. He got ready to defend, but then he looked up and saw Momo and Jiru. "Girls, you need to get Eraserhead out of here and up to the entrance. I'll hold off the villains as long as I can. Backup should be arriving soon." "No, Hisahito, you are a student and are not ready to face those villains. They're not your average street thug. You have no chance against them," Eraserhead said. He was a pro hero and a teacher. His priority was the safety of his students, and he should not be allowing one of them to throw themselves at villains. Yet Eraserhead caught Gaizan's eyes. There was no fear, no hesitation within them. He looked ready to fight, but to protect or just cause. No, Jizan has some remorse in his eyes, as if he had to make up for something. "And you think you can do any better? Like you said, your quirk did nothing against Namu's strength. Until All Might arrives, I'm the only one that can hold him off. Yay, Arazu. When you get back to the upper platform, 13 is going to need your help. Now go," Gaizan commanded. His voice was stern, so Momo and Jiru didn't argue. Eraserhead wanted to protest. He was going against everything he stood for. But Momo and Jiru lifted him over their shoulder and began to drag him away. Gaizan took a breath as he held his arms out in front of him. Then a small yell. Gaizan drew his arms into his natural stance and clenched his jaw as his right arm was healed and his left arm was forcefully set back in place. The pain was enough to make a normal person black out, but Gaizan had gotten used to it. Once his left arm snapped back together, he smiled and faced the villains. He had something to make up for. He had made the wrong choice too many times in his life. It had hurt people, caused death, and made Gaizan sick to his stomach. Now that he had a chance to turn his life around, he wasn't going to let a whiny boy with that man's name take that away from him. You think that since you're willing to let yourself get killed just to save your fellow students, you're a hero, Shigaraki said as he looked Gaizan over. The student was standing before him without an injury to show his previous fights. The mark on him was his missing shirt, and he was willing to continue fighting. And that PSS Shigaraki off. Nothing was supposed to get in his way. All Might was supposed to be waiting for him. Kurogiri was supposed to get the NPC out of the way and Shigaraki would send Namu after All Might. Yet Player 2 wasn't here and an NPC had made themselves Player 3. A player that was somehow holding their own against the anti-All Might. I've got a lot of past mistakes to make up for. If I can't start right now, then I might as well die, Gaizan said. He knew he could hold back Namu, but that would require his full attention. That left Shigaraki. Gaizan hoped that name didn't mean anything to its current user, and Kurogiri to act as they pleased. I can make that happen. Namu, kill this punk, Shigaraki commanded. Namu yelled as he once again charged forward, ready to kill Gaizan. Maybe it was because of the extra energy from Namu's last attack, or the adrenaline. Most likely a combination of both, but this time Gaizan was able to follow Namu's movement. They were still fast and Gaizan still had a strong time following them, yet he was able to react. Gaizan was able to dodge the first 3 attacks but was blindsided by a backhand. As before, Gaizan absorbed as much of the attack as he could. But his quirk was more full this time, so the energy left over was more. Gaizan prepared himself as he went flying again. As he flew, he managed to flip himself upright in the air. Once Gaizan's feet hit the ground, it looked as if he was gliding back with how fast his feet were moving to slow him down. Gaizan finally managed to get his hold and rammed his legs into the ground, digging up the ground into trenches as he slowed down. As Gaizan caught his breath, the skin of his hands healed and his right arm repaired itself. But without skipping a beat, Gaizan roared and his eyes turned yellow, as his skin began to biblically glow a bright yellow, a sign that his quirk was at maximum capability. Gaizan turned himself and looked back at Namu. The next second, Gaizan launched himself forward. Namu screeched back as Gaizan got close and it threw a punch. Gaizan vaulted onto Namu's first and using it as a platform. Gaizan swung his feet ground and kicked Namu in the side of the head. To make sure his attack did something, Gaizan poured half of his quirk's energy into the kick. With that amount of energy, Gaizan felt his leg begin to sprain, but then he became surprised when the Namu didn't go flying. Namu's head had barely even moved from where Gaizan's foot was pressing against it. Gaizan withdrew his leg and then the glow around him turned golden. Gaizan poured the rest of his quirk's energy into the attack and then some. But when Gaizan's foot connected with Namu's jaw, Gaizan felt all the bones in his foot break, and yet still Namu stayed in place. One of Namu's quirks is shock absorption. No matter how much force your attacks have, nothing will harm Namu. Kill him, Shigaraki said. Gaizan thought about how Namu could have a quirk similar to himself, but Namu hadn't used any energy as Gaizan's quirk had. The force of the attack was simply disappearing. Moreover, Eraserhead had explained that Namu's strength didn't come from a quirk. Gaizan's mind went wild trying to put all the pieces together, but then Namu grabbed both of Gaizan's arms and pulled them apart. Gaizan yelled as he was forced into a crude copy of Hercule's hold. Gaizan poured the rest of his energy into his quirks, increasing his quirk's energy and then pouring the outflow into his strength. Gaizan's arms began to glow yellow, then glow began golden as Gaizan kept himself from being torn in half. As Gaizan continued to overwork his quirks, he began to pull his arms in, overpowering Namu. As Gaizan continued to pull his arms in, he stared Namu in its blank eyes. Gaizan's arms almost had his sides as the biblical golden glow enveloped his entire body. Then Gaizan felt warm BLD starting to flow back his lips and fall off his chin. Namu screamed, then brought its foot up and kicked Gaizan in the gut. With that attack, Gaizan's yellow eyes and glowing form disappeared and he was once again sent flying. However, this time instead of landing on the ground, Gaizan crashed into the base of the stairs that led up to the entrance platform. As he crashed, a crater formed around his body. He groaned a bit and picked his head up. His body was screaming in pain as his quirks began to repair his body. Gaizan's vision came into focus and he immediately wished it hadn't, as he saw Namu slowly walking up to him. Gaizan had to overclock his quirk once to save himself, and if he didn't get to his foot soon, then he would be defenseless against the monster designed to kill All Might. He was going to need some help. Once those that remained after Kurogiri's teleported everyone else away had handled the villain, sending him back to Shigaraki, Ochako ran over and watched from the top of the stairs as Gaizan jumped in to protect Mr. Aizawa from the energy blast. She silently cheered as Gaizan attacked the metal giant and injured him. Though she would never admit it, she silently cheered that Shigaraki had taken the metal villain out of the fight, leaving only the damaged suit behind. But then Gaizan had been caught by Namu and beaten back. Ochako knew she needed to help, but she froze. She didn't have control, and right now would be the worst time and place to injure herself. She would just get stuck in the middle of everything. "Uraraka," Momo called out, drawing Ochako's attention down the stairs. She saw Momo and Jiru carrying Mr. Aizawa. He was broken and beaten and only conscious due to his seer's stubborn will. "We need your quirk, Mr. Aizawa is heavy." Ochako immediately hurried down to them, watching Gaizan fend off the Namu as she ran. She reached the girls and their teacher and used her quirk on Mr. Aizawa. She helped them carry their teacher up the stairs, but then Gaizan was sent flying into the base of the stairs. "Hisahito," the girls yelled. Gaizan had just saved Momo and Jiru from a lifetime of embarrassment, and Ochako had known how right-hearted he was. He was starting to make himself to be the strongest member of 1A, but if he was beaten back so badly, so much that his body was broken and he was struggling so much to just sit up, Ochako gritted her teeth. She couldn't let him struggle on his own. She turned to Momo and Jiru and said, "You need to hurry up the stairs. Yaorazu, 13 is going to need your help with first aid. I'll get Hisahito and bring him up." The two girls look at Gaizan, then at the top of the stairs. "Just go," Ochako said, then didn't wait for another second. Canceling her own gravity, Ochako launched herself at Gaizan. The moment she was above the crate, she cancelled her quirk and landed next to Gaizan, where he was forcing himself out of the stairs. He stood up on his own feet, but he was swaying back and forth. As Ochako jumped down into the crate and slid down to Gaizan, "Hisahito, Uraraka, I thought I told you to call me Gaizan." Gaizan mumbled, looking over at Ochako. His eyes were glazed over, out of focus, yet he was conscious enough to complain about being called Hisahito. "Come, we need to get to the top of the stairs." Ilda escaped and ran for backup, Ochako said, and used her quirk on Gaizan. But then Gaizan grabbed her wrist. He applied just enough pressure on her wrist to stop her from closing her fingers. "Though, I have to continue to fight Namu. I'm the only one that can hold him back," Gaizan said. His body was broken and beaten, and his healing was slowing down. He couldn't last much longer, but he wasn't going to give up. "You'll die," Ochako said, pulling Gaizan out of the crater. Yet Gaizan grabbed a hold of a piece of rubble and kept himself from being pulled up the stairs. They had only known each other for a week, but Ochako didn't want to see one of her classmates die. Well, maybe except for one, but Ochako tried not to think about that. "And if I don't, everyone else does too. A hero's job is to protect them, giving their all to save the people around them. A hero would fight with their life to allow others to smile," Gaizan said, finally looking Ochako in the eyes. He planted his feet on the ground, his body mostly healed, and a small yellow glow pulsed over his body. Gaizan's words echoed through Ochako's mind. They were the same words All Might had told her when she was deciding whether to accept One for All. She looked at Gaizan in the eyes and saw the same strength and fight within his eyes as she had seen in All Might. Gaizan might not have won for all, but to Ochako, Gaizan was acting the same as All Might. "You're not the only one that can fight against Namu," Ochako said, canceling her quirk on Gaizan. If Gaizan was determined to fight Namu, then Ochako would do her best to fight alongside him. Her eyes narrowed as she focused on Namu. He was slowly walking to them, his villainous aura fighting against Ochako and Gaizan's heroic one. "I've got one last good attack on me. I'll be going all out," Gaizan said. His eyes flashed golden and his right hand started to glow. The biblical glow around Gaizan's arms was no longer soft, but razor-cut and pointed. "Would you do me the honors of doing the same?" Ochako nodded. She really hadn't practiced using One for All. She had managed to localize the strength of the quirk to signal parts of her body, thus minimizing the damage. But she couldn't control the percentage she used. It was either 0 or 100. However, Gaizan made it clear that if Namu made it to the stairs, everyone was dead. People that Ochako considered friends. "Good, let's go," Gaizan said. Ochako powered up One for All in her legs and they rocketed towards Namu. Time to see how they handled themselves and if they could protect their friends. As they neared Namu, it threw a punch. It would have connected, but suddenly the glow around Gaizan grew, and then he seemed to teleport to the side and block the punch. As he blocked, the aura around his right arm became brighter and more sharp. Ochako, however, saw that was causing him great pain, yet it had cleared the way for their attack. It gave Gaizan and Ochako a path to draw their fist back and rocket them forward. Gaizan had told himself that he was more than his past, beyond everything that had been given to him. by his father and that man. Yet those experiences, those powers were tied to him and he wasn't going to lose them anytime soon. Gaizan had only known Wana for a week, and well, that didn't make this fight personal for him. He was starting to become friends with them, and how poetic that the first people he had a chance to save as Gaizan Hisahito would be them. Yet his base quirk wasn't enough. He might regret his past and everything, but he knew he had to use it to save his friends. As Gaizan's fist hit Namu in the jaw, Gaizan consciously activated a second quirk. His entire body once again gained a biblical glow, but it was entirely golden and it was cut through the air. Gaizan yelled in his mind, force multiplier times 10. Akaho could feel that her punch wasn't doing any damage to Namu. Was this all she had to offer while Gaizan was willing to give it his all? He is sacrificing his life and his career to save our classmates, so much that the pain he felt was making him bleed. Was she not willing to do the same? She was the 9th user of One for All. All Might trusts her to become the next symbol of peace. That meant she had to work harder than anyone else, take on responsibilities that no one else could fulfill. She was the next symbol of peace. Ochako poured her heart and soul into One for All as it overtook her body. Go beyond, plus ultra. One for all. Beyond my limits, beyond 100%. As they attacked, Gaizan's entire body flashed golden, while Ochako's hair floated up a bit and took on a pink hue. Namu seemed to hold its place, but with everything against it, he began to move backwards. Then with a bit more effort together as heroes, Gaizan and Ochako sent Namu flying back. Shigaraki watched as 2 dumb students rushed Namu. One of them had been informed of Namu's shock absorption and yet he continued to fight. The other student seemed to simply follow her classmate, following him into a fight that could only end with both of them getting killed. They somehow managed to dodge Namu's attack and gotten close to land a hit. But Shigaraki smiled. No matter how strong they hit, Namu's shock absorption was too strong and nothing would get through. But both their bodies flashed into bright colors and Namu let out a shriek and then was launched right back at Shigaraki. He began to panic as the large body of Namu came right at him. Namu, stop yourself, Shigaraki yelled. Luckily Kurogiri was quicker to action, wrapping himself and Shigaraki out of Namu's path. Namu heard Shigaraki's command and dug his hands and legs into the ground. It dug trenches as it slowed down, kicking up the loose dirt. Gaizan noticed that smoke was rising from Namu's hands and feet, slowly burning the fresh off from the friction. Namu stopped itself and the bones of its hands and feet were seen. Ochako rose to her feet as the pink hue aura around her then disappeared. Achiak looked Namu up and down then said, your Namu is out of the fight and you have no hope of fighting both of us. How did you beat Namu's shock absorption? Shigaraki yelled, like a little kid. Like a little kid that wasn't getting a toy that he wanted. Absorption, not nullification, meaning there's a limit to how much he can absorb at once. Now give up, Gaizan said. He was breathing heavily but was managing to stay on his feet. The golden light around him flickered but stayed in place. Namu, attack, Shigaraki yelled. He was here to kill All Might if a pair of high schoolers wanted to get in his way. He would get rid of them. Just 2 more deaths to shake the world with. He can't, Gaizan said. But then he saw Namu come running at him. His hands and feet were healed and he was barreling towards them. Shock absorption isn't Namu's only quirk, Shigaraki said. He has hyper regeneration, and it was better than yours. Gaizan couldn't believe Namu could have more than 1 quirk. Then again he had more than 1 quirks, but then that means that man was still alive. But only that he had created Namu and sent his disciple to attack USJ. If that man found out about Gaizan, then Gaizan was pulled from his thoughts as Namu was upon them. He didn't have time to think about what this all meant. He quickly grabbed Ochako and put himself between her and Namu's fists. He felt the punch, not even worrying about absorbing any of the impact. Gaizan managed to hold his ground, but then Namu drew back its fist and plowed its fist through Gaizan's arms. The 2 UA students went flying. Gaizan grabbed Gaizan and rotated himself in the air, so he hit the stairs first. The moment Gaizan's back hit the stairs, he felt his ribs finally break. But not worried about that, he looked at Ochako and saw that her legs and left hand were purple. Ochako looked around in a daze but then used her good hand to pull herself up. We have to continue to fight. She tried to pull herself out of the ground, but Gaizan stopped her. No, we can't. We can't beat that thing, Gaizan said as he struggled to heal his body. His quirk was becoming strained. If Namu had multiple quirks and the name Shigaraki was still around, that could only mean one thing. Shigaraki did have a connection to that man, which meant All Might wasn't as successful as he thought he was. The symbol of evil was still alive and kicking. But you were confident a few minutes ago, Ochako said, confused by Gaizan's sudden reverse of belief. With all the adrenaline running through her body, she hadn't realized how broken she or Gaizan were. That was before I knew that All for One was involved, Gaizan said. In his hysteria, he didn't think about whether Ochako would recognize the name, and if she did, how she would react to how he knew the name. Nor did he really care. Even people who didn't know who he was, from the name alone, felt something. It doesn't matter. Wait, how do you know about All for One? Ochako began to panic. If Gaizan knew about All for One, was there a chance he knew about One for All? How much did he know? Were All Might and Ochako in danger? Had One for All accidentally been revealed? That doesn't matter, but it sounds like you know that name too. If you knew half of what I knew, you would understand we can't do anything against that thing now, Gaizan said. His mind was fuzzy, and he could barely see Ochako. He felt his quirk urging him forwards, to protect himself and his classmates. But Namu will kill everyone. Are we just going to sit around and let that happen? Ochako said. Suddenly a loud ringing sound echoed through the USJ, followed by a second one, and then the sound of something large and metal hitting the floor. Then the atmosphere felt charged with an aura that once lifted it up with peace. Peace then was now being condensed into a feeling of fury. Gaizan didn't even need to look up to know who had arrived. One for All did not fail to explain perfectly the light that All Might gave to the world. Gaizan was starting to understand how PSS the self-proclaimed demon lord off so much. A man who wanted nothing more than powerful to be the most feared, to lose against a feeling of such peace. Gaizan had to laugh a bit. Talk about perfect timing. Backup arrived just in time. Toshinori hated fate. He knew he had lost track of time doing hero work in the morning, but he had realized how badly he had done so. Not until he got to the teacher's lounge and deflated, when then proceeded to spit out an alarming amount of BLD to a normal person. Toshinori was just glad it wasn't as bad as it used to be whenever he went past his time limit. After wiping his lips, Toshinori sat down on the couch, and then before the thought of having a chance to relax could his mind, the door opened and Principal Nezu walked in. Toshinori had heard horror stories from his coworker when he first joined the faculty. Horror stories about Principal Nezu's lectures, and how dull they were, but it seemed as if Principal Nezu had a second quirk that did allow anyone present to fall asleep as long as he kept talking. After the stories, Toshinori learned the signs. First, the recipient of the lecture had done something wrong and they knew it. Check. Second, Principal Nezu would find them alone, in a location where they would not be disturbed for some time. Check. Double check as Principal Nezu locked the door. Third, Principal Nezu had a small smirk on his face with a villainous glint in his eyes, all the while never once looking at the recipient during the lecture began. Check. Fourth, Principal Nezu would walk to his chair as he did not have a care in the world. Check. Fifth, the way to know how long the lecture was going to be was whether a teapot and teacups seemed to magically appear in front of Nezu. Though tea usually meant only an hour to an hour and a half. If only one cup appears, 2 hours at the minimum. 2 cups meant another hour on top of that, as Principal Nezu expected the recipient to answer any question he gave them and would not move on until he received an answer he liked. Sixth, and the most feared, the type of tea. The tea in general and the cups were a good indication of how long the lecture would be. If the recipient was to taste imperial black leaf tea, they would need to prepare themselves for half an hour of complete silence, while Principal Nezu quietly judged them, followed by a single question, and once Principal Nezu received an answer he would wait another 20 minutes before he dove into a 6-hour lecture that typically would have a quiz at the end. Toshinori had heard the stories of a teacher who had received the imperial leaf tea lectures and would quit the next day. The only one to receive that lecture and still be a teacher was Eraserhead. But look where that put him. So being the #1 hero and this being his first month of teaching, Toshinori thought he was safe. Yet as he tasted the tea he learned how wrong he was. So after the 30-minute wait, Principal Nezu asked, as a teacher of UA and someone who holds their students' future in their hands, what is your top priority? To teach them how to handle foreseen events, but prepare and give them the skills to handle unforeseen events. Toshinori froze as he realized he wouldn't know if he had the right answer and would only know after 20 minutes. And if he did have the wrong answer, that just added another 20 minutes of waiting. Though surprisingly only after 10 minutes of Principal Nezu judging the symbol of peace. He nodded his head and began his lecture. Toshinori's relief of having the right answer and one good enough to warrant a 10-minute wait was short-lived as he realized how the stories he heard did not do the actual thing justice. An hour after Principal Nezu began his lecture, Toshinori was already wishing for something to happen. Anything, nuclear warfare, natural disaster. He was even starting to get to the point of wishing he hadn't killed One for All and he would attack. Then a quick rapping came from the door, and it sounded urgent enough that Principal Nezu stopped mid-thought and walked over to the door. He unlocked and opened it, only for a very distressed Ilda to be standing on the other side. The USJ. It's being attacked. Villain broke in. Mr. Aizawa is holding them off. Everyone's scattered. We need All Might, Ilda said in a breathless voice, showing how strong and fast he had run to get back to the campus. Principal Nezu fought against his instinct to look behind him at the true form of the #1 hero. He focused on Ilda and said, go back, help your friends. I'll send words to all available teachers. All Might will be in the forefront. If we're lucky he'll get there before you do. Ilda nodded, his mind latching onto the orders given to him. He turned and began running down the hallway. When he turned the corner, Principal Nezu turned around and saw that Toshinori had already buffed up. Don't think this has saved you from the rest of my lecture. Your fellow teacher can testify to how long I hold on to a thought. All Might nodded and, more than ready to get out of the sight of the white mouse, dashed out of the teacher's lounge. He left a dust trail as he dashed through the hallways of UA. He rushed out of the front door and looked towards the USJ. Without a second thought, he took off, quickly catching up to Ilda and then shooting ahead of his student. When he arrived at the USJ, he found the cracked door Ilda had slipped out. Unfortunately, it wasn't big enough for him to get through. He quickly threw a punch, and then with a second punch, the door fell in and hit the ground, resonating the sound through the building. He walked in and saw the mess. Some of Class 1A, along with Mr. Aizawa and 13, were on the top platform. His fellow teachers were both broken and bleeding. The students appeared to be fine, but All Might understood that not all scars were visible. He looked down and saw Gaizan and Ochako in a crater inside the stairs. Then he noticed a second crater lower down on the stairs. It was clear the two had been through a long fight and were not backing down from injuries. Yet now they were breathing heavily and struggling to stay awake. All Might looked around and saw signs of fights. He saw sections of the different areas destroyed, but the worst of the carnage was in the middle plaza. Unconscious thugs on the outer ring with several holes in the ground in the middle. All this, and All Might had a sense of what had happened. And it was enough for him to drop his iconic smile into a groan as he yelled, "Fear not, students, for I am here." All Might. The students nearby cheered, all of them relieved to see the number one hero had come to rescue them. Though some were off-put by the scowl on his face. If the symbol of peace was getting this serious, then the fight had already been decided. All Might looked at them for a second to reassure them, then began to walk down the stairs to Gaizan and Ochako. "Now who is the punk that decided to mess with my class?" Shigaraki laughed and said, "Finally the final boss showed up. We can clear this level and move on." Shigaraki was no longer scratching his neck with his full attention and focused on the number one hero, on killing him and reshaping the world and society. All Might knelt next to Gaizan and Ochako. They looked horrible, and it was clear they had made themselves the front-line defense to stop anyone else from getting hurt too much. Pain that they shouldn't have had to endure, as All Might should have been here from the start. Ochako had used her primary quirks to take the weight off her broken body, while Gaizan looked like he was going to break his teeth with how strong he was clenching them. "How are you two?" Ochako didn't answer, so Gaizan said, "We're still breathing. Wait here while I clean up this mess." All Might then stood up and took a step, but then something happened, something that had never happened to him before. He was held back by a strong grip on his forearm. He looked down and saw Gaizan holding him back. It wasn't Gaizan's strength that was holding him back, but the pressure from the aura emitting from the blonde-haired student. If the situation wasn't serious, All Might would have been shocked by the motion. "That Namu down there has more than one quirk." Shigaraki called them shock absorption and hyper-regeneration. "But there's a limit to how much Namu can absorb at once, so we managed to get through it once. I'm sure you'll do better," Gaizan said, then released All Might. All Might had officially been tagged in and Gaizan could rest. As he lay down the stairs, he mumbled something that sounded like "all for one," and then passed out. Gaizan's words registered in All Might's mind, who quickly looked at Ochako. "He knows only about all for one. He hasn't brought that up," Ochako said. Gaizan had just passed out, but she didn't want to take the risk of naming one for all in front of him. He had proved his situational awareness was level above everyone else's. "You used it." All Might noticed the state of Ochako's right arm and legs. Ochako had only had one for all for a little over a month now, so she didn't have much control. To try to prevent the injuries she was now dealing with, All Might had put her on probation until she gained more control. That just showed how desperate the situation had gotten if she was willing to put up with her injuries. Hisahito, he was willing to give his all in the fight against Namu. Why, yet he was already tired from fighting the giant metal villain. "You trust me to be the next symbol of peace. I couldn't let myself fall behind." He needed my help, Ochako said, fighting back tears as she forced her thoughts into words. "I understand. You've done well. Rest and I'll handle the rest," All Might said, then walked down the stairs. "My students have informed me of what occurred in my absence, and I must say, in all my years of being a pro hero, I have never made a fight personal. But after what I've learned, what you've done to my students, I'll tell you what I'm about to do to you and your Namu. I'm going to enjoy it." All Might reached the ground with the last words, cracking forming under his foot from the pressure. "So the number one hero has a dark side." Shigaraki gave a big smile, then lazily lifted a hand as if there was nothing that mattered if he did. Then he pointed at All Might. "Good. Namu, kill him." Namu dashed forward and All Might matched its speed. They met in the middle, punching and kicking. Namu even bit All Might. Everyone could just watch in amazement as the two titans clashed. Each blow shook the ground and sent harsh breezes through the USJ. It was impressive the amount of power two people could hold. My students informed me of Namu's two quirks, more importantly their limits. All Might punched Namu's arm into the air and with no defense. He got around Namu and wrapped his arm around the creature's midsection. Then, with more effort than initially expected, All Might lifted Namu into the air. All Might then let his weight fall backwards as he suplexed Namu into the ground. That had been the plan at least. As Namu's head neared the ground, a portal formed and the upper half of its body went through. All Might saw this and looked around to see where the Namu would be crawling out from. But then he felt a pair of hands latched onto his side, especially over his left side from his weakness. All Might let out a small grunt as the pain started to flow throughout his body. The sight looks like one out of an old horror story. As BLD began to bleed through All Might's shirt, it began to drip from All Might's back and fall to the ground. All Might let go of Namu and gripped Namu's hand. He tried to force Namu's hand open, but it was like a vice grip. All Might continued to free himself, but then Namu began to lower back through the portal, dragging the symbol of peace along for the ride. I never said Namu was going to be the one to kill you. He just has to hold you still in Kirigiri's portal, Shigaraki said, then gave out a dry laugh. Everything was going to plan. There was the small hiccup of the blonde student fighting against Mr. Sutin, but then against Shigaraki never really liked him. And that blonde brat. And the pink glow girl didn't do much to Namu, and it was still ready to fight against All Might. But in the end was near and closing and fast. I don't like leaving things in my portals, but for you and all the parts you'll be leaving, I'm willing to make an exception, Kirigiri said, as the portal began to expand to allow All Might to easily push through. As All Might got close to the portal, he struggled even harder against Namu's grip. He had never thought he would go out like this, and with all of his students, Eraserhead and 13 counting on him. All Might refused to give up, but he was unable to free himself. Then when he was only an inch away, All Might heard the sound of ice crack, and suddenly Namu's left hand began to form. Very cold. Cold enough that a shiver went down All Might's spine. All Might followed the ice through the portal and over to where Shoto Todoroki was standing. The dual-haired student scoffed and said, "Sorry it took me a moment to get here. Your thugs weren't willing to give much information without some percussion." Kirigiri, help Namu, Shigaraki said. Suddenly an explosion went off right next to his ear. Then one threw Kirigiri to the ground. It seemed Todoroki was not the only student that had been underestimated. "Impossible. My body was hidden," Kirigiri said as Bakugo landed next to him, gripping the metal neckpiece. Kirigiri tried to free himself, but then he saw the feral grin on Bakugo's face, asking for a reason divided by. "In the beginning, I didn't think you had a body, but then why would you be wearing this piece of neck armor?" Bakugo said, lighting off a small explosion against the armor. "You move and you're dead." Shigaraki's focus was drawn away from his two captured allies as Kirishima tried to attack. Shigaraki easily dodged his attack and reached forward to kill Kirishima, but the red hair jumped down. "All you annoying NPCs getting in my way. Thank you for the rescue," All Might said, as he gripped the frozen hand of Namu and broke it. He rolled away from the Namu and stood up. "Now surrender and end this madness." Yet Shigaraki was no longer focused on All Might as he appeared to be looking out into space. Then his body began to shake as if he couldn't contain his anger. "We were so close. You lied, MSDR. All Might hasn't gotten any weaker." Shigaraki paused. Then he gained a smile. "But that doesn't mean we've lost. Namu, free Kirigiri and then attack all these worthless brats." All Might was about to comment Namu not being able to free itself without injury, then he remembered it had hyper-regeneration. The next moment All Might heard ice breaking and he turned towards Namu. All Might saw something that made him sick to his non-existent stomach. Namu, with all of its skin on its left side, missing its left arm, was running towards Bakugo. With every step Namu took, more and more of its body regenerated until it was fully healed, and it drew its right fist to hit Bakugo. All the while All Might had begun to move, but with every step, it was obvious All Might would not arrive in enough time to push Bakugo out of the way and get himself out of the way too. All Might was the first to arrive, and he pushed Bakugo out of the way and took the hit himself. It could just be a height difference and a coincidence when Namu hit All Might's side where his injury was. All Might realized the creature had been aiming for it. Did Namu know about All Might's injury and the height aligned with Bakugo's head? Did Namu know All Might would arrive and take the hit? Had it been counting on that? The only thing All Might knew for certain was that Namu knew about his injury. The only question was how. "You heroes are so predictable. We'll always protect those weaker than you," Shigaraki said, staring All Might down as the symbol of peace took a small step back as he held a hand up to his bleeding injury. "Young Todoroki, young Kirishima, get back to the rest of your class. Leave the rest to me." All Might looked over and saw Bakugo landing on the ground far away from the fight. He wanted the students out of the way of the fight, but also All Might could feel his body straining. The attack on his wound was cutting his time down. But if it came to it, All Might would do anything to protect his student. Even with the last two good punches he had left, Kirishima began to protest, even activating his quirk over his arm, showing he was ready to fight. But then Todoroki grabbed his collar and began to drag him away. Kirishima hardened his legs in an attempt to ground himself, but Todoroki continued to drag him away from the fight. "All Might wants us out of the way or we'll be a distraction." Fine, Kirishima let Todoroki drag him away from the fight. Maybe if he was lucky he would be able to see the #1 hero in action. So how about finishing our fight? All Might said, shifting his feet to get ready. This was the most difficult fight he had had since killing All for One, and All Might was going to stand his ground. As All Might shifted his weight back, the ground began to crack under the pressure and kicked up some dust, adding the dramatic flair of his words. All Might took a deep breath as he prepared himself for whatever happened next. Shigaraki pointed at All Might and yelled, "Namu, kill him." Yet Shigaraki's words did not hold the same weight as threats from All Might's greatest enemy. All Might looked at Namu, and the moment the creature flinched, All Might dashed forwards. Like before, the two titans ran at each other. However, this time both were much slower, and All Might noticed. The wounds given to Namu previously by the student of Class 1 were starting to affect it. It didn't have unlimited stamina, so repetitive use of its quirks was slowing it down, and soon Namu would find its limit. All Might knew what he had to do. All Might gritted his teeth and began to punch much harder and faster than his wound should have let him. All Might was called the symbol of peace, a title he had to hold up, now more than ever. My student have heard these words before. Today some have even learned what they mean. But allow me to show you their true meaning. Go beyond, plus ultra. All Might yelled as he deflected a punch, then putting his weight behind the next attack. He got in close and unleashed a massive uppercut. Namu. The initial contact did nothing, but with the follow-through, Namu went flying into the air. Namu hit the top of the USJ dome, then went through it. A hero's job is protect those around them, to fight with all their power, then push past their limits. All Might brought down his right hand and let it hang by his side as he couldn't move a muscle. Then steam began to flow off his body, telling All Might he had most definitely gone past his limits. Luckily it was masked by the dust. But All Might knew if he tried to move, then his body would deflate and he would be defenseless. All he could do was bluff. Then let's see how you deal with this, Shigaraki said, a grin appearing behind his mask as if everything was going according to his plan. Yet All Might didn't understand. Their biggest weapons were in the next city over, and while he definitely wouldn't be able to do anything, All Might was imposing enough to make any sane villains want to run away. Suddenly a purple portal opened a few feet away from All Might. He could only watch as Namu came flying out of the portal. It yelled as it had its fist reared back, ready to throw a punch that would kill All Might. All Might froze, as there was nothing else he could do. If he moved, he would deflate and Namu would most likely kill him. Even if Namu missed, Toshinori's weakened state would be revealed and then he would be killed. Yet if he didn't move, then the result would be the same, his death. He's not done yet. A bone-chilling but pained voice came from behind All Might. All Might felt a person run into his back, then grab a hold of his shoulder. All Might felt his body begin to deflate. Then suddenly it was full of energy. All Might saw a golden glow coming from behind him as he felt the energy flow into his body. The energy was completely different from One for All, but it mixed with One for All, blazing the embers All Might had left. A small smoldering fire was now a large bonfire, and was threatening to burn down the forest. One more time then, with power behind it. The voice said it rang in All Might's ear, like ancient church bells. It held untold power, enough to shake the world and cause all to bow before it. More powerful than All Might thought possible even by his standards. All Might looked down at his fists. A golden biblical glow had enveloped his body. He felt the power escaping into the air as if even two mortal bodies were not able to contain it. Agreed. All Might drew back his fist and met Namu head-on. His reach was longer, so Namu got hit first. The power and strength were tenfold of the previous hit. It looked as if Namu was gone before All Might's knuckles even made contact. 1 second it was reaching forward to grab All Might, and then the next it vanished. No dust trail, no screech from the creature. The only sign to Namu's exit was a second hole appearing within the USJ roof. Impossible, Shigaraki yelled, scratching his neck. The red rash became worse. He even began to draw BLD. All Might was weaker, but he had help. A power-up from a stupid player 3 that was never supposed to be able to play. Shigaraki was supposed to be the winner. He was supposed to beat the final boss. All Might looked Shigaraki up and won, but then heard a body hit the floor behind him. He looked back and saw Gaizan kneeling on the floor. Gaizan was kneeling with his head hanging down on his right knee, his two arms supporting himself from the ground. Gaizan coughed up some BLD, then BLD began to slowly leak out of his mouth. Gaizan's body looked even worse. Both of his arms were purple and his left leg was misshapen. All Might was afraid Gaizan had received the same level of injury he had 6 years ago. Gaizan then looked up at All Might, his eyes unfocused. He then chuckled a bit and in a silly tone said, "Limits are bullshit. So Shigaraki, do you surrender?" All Might asked, flexing his entire body. Now that Gaizan wasn't holding on to him, All Might felt just as weak. Luckily this time there was no way Namu would be returning. "This is unfair. All your dumb power-ups and secondary phases. You cheated," Shigaraki yelled. All Might would have slapped the villain if he could move. He could feel his body struggling to keep its form. Whatever Gaizan had done or given him was the sole reason he was holding this form. Yet now that power was beginning to fade, as Gaizan was swaying back and forth and seemed to be ready to fall unconscious. The tension in the air was thickened and both sides looked ready to attack. But only one was. Suddenly Shigaraki sprinted forward, his hand up and ready to kill All Might. And he would have if not a gunshot that pierced the air. A bullet curved around and hit Shigaraki in the shoulder, taking him down to the ground. 2 more shots went off and would have hit Shigaraki if not for Kurogiri stepping in and teleporting the 2 away. With the clear and present danger gone, Gaizan fell to the ground and began to chuckle. His chuckle broke into a full-on laugh as he looked at All Might and said, "So that's what one for all looks like up close." Gaizan could feel it. His mind was shutting down a tactile to numb the pain he was supposed to be feeling, pumping his body full of serotonin and making everything feel like a big joke. Otherwise he would have never said that. All Might quickly turned and looked at Gaizan. "How could a high school know that name?" "How do you know that name?" Gaizan just gave a big smile and laughed. "I'll tell you my secret if you tell me yours, and I believe Uraraka is involved. You two share something and it isn't family ties." Gaizan laughed a bit, his eyes starting to glaze over as he looked at All Might. Then something weird happened. Gaizan began to see a yellow glow appear around the symbol of peace. A glow not all that different Gaizan gained from pushing his quirks. He could also feel All Might's aura. It was peace and calm, and when he looked over at Ochako, he got a similar feeling while she had a little extra on the side. "All Might," Akaho said, coming through the dust. She was floating and pulling herself along with her good arm. When she was next to Gaizan, she cancelled her quirk and let hers fall to the ground. Though she barely dropped an inch, the pain from hitting the ground made her mind instantly go white. It took all of her willpower to bring the world back into focus. "Young Uraraka," All Might said, then deflated, "CRP." Everyone in that USJ would see Toshinori's true form, a secret that very few knew about, barely any more than those who knew about One for All. The first-year staff of UA, the principal and some trusted friends of Toshinori. But now all the students of Class 1 were going to learn. Suddenly a cement wall appeared, separating the 3 of them from the rest of the USJ. Toshinori recognized it as the work of Cementos. Said Hiro walked through a small opening, which closed after he stepped through. "All Might, you are safe. I'm also a big fan." But then Cementos' eyes landed on Gaizan and Ochako. He hadn't noticed the 2 of them. If he had, he would have kept them separate from Toshinori. Cementos moved to do so but was stopped by Toshinori. "Don't worry, I trust these 2. He had a small smile on his face as he looked at Ochako. She was looking at Gaizan with a concerned look, as he still had a massively stupid grin on his face. He looked like a horror villain as his teeth were stained with his BLD, and BLD trails were going down his chin and neck. How he was still conscious was anyone's guess. Where the hell did this come from? Powerloader yelled. Everyone looked over and saw he was picking apart the metal suit that Shigaraki hadn't fully decayed. Cementos lowered the wall to allow the 3 to see what Powerloader was referring to. "A villain was wearing it," Gaizan said, in a chirpy voice. He then laughed as if he thought of a really funny joke. He began to rock back and forth, causing Ochako's concern for him to grow that much more. Powerloader had a look of dread on his face as he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "I need a pair of cleaner robots to the USJ to move some salvage. Tell Midoriya and Hatsum to meet me in classroom 6G. Powerloader looked back down at the mangled suit with a look of dread on his face. If a villain had access to build this kind of suit, there was no telling who he shared it with. Along that thought, Powerloader was starting to have an idea of what the purpose truly meant. After the crazy week that was the beginning of high school, Izuku and Mei, more Izuku than Mei, were grateful that school had slowed down to its normal pace. This allowed UA to feel like an actual high school rather than one disaster after another. The day was normal and nothing out of the ordinary happened. This was a thought Izuku had throughout the day but never voiced it. Izuku would come to regret even having that thought. History was the last PRD and Izuku and Mei were on a worksheet together. There was only half an hour left of school when a teacher's assistant walked into. He headed over to the teacher at their desk and handed them a note. A hushed conversation happened between the teacher and the assistant, but Izuku heard mention of Classroom 6G. The only UA staff members who knew Classroom 6G was being used were Powerloader and Principal Nezu. Why would either of them be calling Izuku out of class? Whatever it was, couldn't it have waited until after school was done? Eventually, the teacher nodded and then stood up. She locked eyes with Izuku and said, "Izuku Midoriya, Mei Hatsum, Powerloader has asked that you meet with him at Classroom 6G. The teacher looked to the Ta to confirm the room number again. The Ta nodded and the teacher turned back to Izuku. "He has something of importance to discuss with you." "As in right now?" Izuku asked as he put his pencil in his notebook. In case he needed to close it, he could easily open it back to where he left off. And with Powerloader calling him and Mei out, he figured it had to be of the utmost importance to not wait until the end of school. "Yes, the notes say immediately," the Ta said, holding out a yellow slip note. "You can stop by after whatever Powerloader needs you for and pick up tonight's homework," the teacher said. Izuku and Mei quickly closed their notebooks and slipped their class material into their backpack. After slipping on their backpack, the duo hurried to the door and slipped out. Once in the hallway, Izuku took off. With everyone being in class, he wouldn't have to worry about running into anyone, meaning he could run fast enough that Mei struggled to keep up with him. Neither of them spoke until they reached the front door of the building. As Mei pushed her door out of the way, she turned to Izuku and asked, "Why do you think Power Loader would call us out of class?" Izuku ran through his open door and answered with, "Obviously it's something important, most likely has to deal with Project Hero Suit. So the reason question is, why didn't Power Loader wait until school was over? It's the last PRD in class gets over in 30 minutes. Once outside in front of the main building, Izuku and Mei noticed the smoke coming up in the distance, but neither mentioned it. They just continued to run towards the support department. Once they reached the support department, Izuku quickly scanned his ID badge to gain them access. Once inside, they ran down the empty hallways until they reached classroom 6G. Izuku scanned his hand on the door, and with a hiss of air, the doors swung open. They had been expecting to see Power Loader waiting for them, but they were greeted by an empty classroom. "Jibisu, where's Power Loader?" Izuku asked. He walked over and put his backpack on one of the desks left in the room. The room looked exactly as the last time he had left it. "I do not have his current location, but he and other teachers of the Hero course were called out to an off-campus location for an emergency. He notified me that he would be arriving in a few minutes and had a great deal of information to share. However, he did not explain further." Jibisu said, "Looks like we've got some time to kill," Izuku said, as he pulled out his math homework and began to work on it. Less than a minute later, he heard mumbles and grunts coming from Mei. He didn't even need to look up to know what she was trying to do. "Hatsum, you know Jibisu is one of the most advanced AI in the world. A learning one at that. Every time you try to break one of his firewalls, he adapts. You're not getting into that holo table. And you know it's only coded to Power Loader and my fingerprint." Izuku finally looked up from his paper. Every time they spent any amount of time in 6G, Mei tried to use the different machines. With every attempt, Izuku got some amusement out of it, and he was going to make her stop anytime soon. "So why won't you save both of us the trouble and add me to the system?" Mei huffed and kicked the holo table, but walked away accepting defeat once again, but not for the last time. She was like a kid in a candy shop who had been told that they couldn't buy anything while there was a sale going on. She hated it. "Because we both know that you could spend hours looking at it and never get your homework done. Because you can become so focused on something and the world disappears from around you." "I've seen that before," Izuku said, going back to his homework. "And for that, Power Loader and I both agreed that not adding you to the system would save a lot of people a lot of headaches in the future. Headaches, explosions, accidents, potential lawsuits, expulsion, and then several tubs of ice cream eaten through tries. So let Mei try all she wanted to gain access, but Izuku was not going to give it to her. "What, you don't trust me?" Mei sighed in defeat and pulled out her homework. "I do trust you with many things. One is my life, but something like this, no. I don't think you'll try to overthrow the world, but you struggle to get inventing out of your mind. This is making sure you aren't given any more temptations," Izuku said, not even realizing what he had just said. Mei looked like she wanted to say something, but then she closed her mouth. She joined Izuku in working on their homework, but then the door hissed, catching both of their attention. The door opened and Power Loader walked in with some cleanup bots behind him. They were carrying what appeared to be a large pile of scrap metal. "Good afternoon, you two. Glad you could make it," Power Loader said to his student, then turned to the robots. "Just put it in the center." The robots chirped and carried their load to the middle of the room and dropped it. They then turned and rolled out of the room, leaving the three to look over the supposed pile of scrap. But even then, different pieces looked familiar to Izuku. Izuku stood up and walked over to the pile and crouched down. "What's all this?" He ran his hands over the pile. Most of the metal was dented and broken into pieces. Yet to his eyes, it didn't look like complete junk, a mindset he had picked up from Mrs. Hatsumi, as she was always repurposing broken items around the workshop. "This is a copycat," Power Loader said, and began looking for something in the pile. "The USJ was just attacked." Izuku stood upright to fight, while Mei closed up on herself. "Don't worry, no one was severely injured. The teachers are in recovery right now, along with 2 students, who did more damage to themselves than the villains did. It was mainly low-level thugs looking to cause some chaos. Class 1 was able to handle themselves. The teachers handled the rest. However, one of the villains was wearing this." Power Loader found what he was looking for and pulled out a helmet. "Remind you of anything?" Power Loader tossed the helmet to Izuku. Izuku caught it. The metal was cold to the touch, and it had dirt and stretched all over it. It was the size of a large watermelon, easily fitting a person's head and with room to spare. Izuku slipped his head and his vision became obscured except for the 2 eye lines. "It's a helmet. Its vision is horrible. I don't see how anyone could fight in this thing," Izuku said, his voice echoing around his ears. It was almost deafening how much his voice echoed. "Just add it to the list of what made the helmet so bad. That's because it's not powered on." Mei said. She walked around and grabbed a wire. She produced extra wiring and electrical tape out of nowhere and quickly connected the 2 wires and then the lengthened end to Izuku's arc reactor. Once all the wires were connected, Izuku's arc reactor pulsed green and then eye slits glowed and a heads-up display appeared around Izuku's head. It showed power 1000%, weapons systems offline, armor comprised, along with a bunch of data. Izuku relayed what he saw while looking at the fuzzy display. It was glitching out in different parts, only allowing Izuku to catch glimpses of other information. Remind you of anything? Power Loader repeated his question. It was almost unnerving how similar it was. But Jabisu had been on lockdown. No was supposed to be able to gain access, but then there was the login with Hisashi's information the day of the break-in. Izuku paused as he looked at the HUD. Then back at the pile of metal. The HUD scanned the metal and it briefly displayed something of great interest to Izuku. Izuku looked over the pile of scrap as a hologram that looked like a suit began to morph together on the right side of the HUD. Yeah, it's a lot like. Izuku stopped, then pulled off the helmet. He walked over to the holo table, disconnected the helmet and put it. Izuku then powered the holo table on and after a few seconds he said, "Jabisu, pull up Project Hero Suit Mark I." "One moment," Jabisu said. And then the hologram of the suit appeared above the table. Izuku raised the helmet and held it next to the suit. "It looks a lot like that." Mei looked between the helmet and the suit. She could see the similarities. However, the physical helmet was a crude copy, with bigger and sharper angles than the fluid design of Hisashi Sutaku, like an attempt to copy the suit from memory. She looked over at Power Loader. "What does this mean?" "It means during the break-in, someone didn't just corrupt the files for Project Hero Suit. They copied it then made their own suit. The question is how quickly will they be able to get to the more advanced suits? Sutaku never got a working prototype, but clearly this villain did. So the question is how deep did the villains go looking through the files they copied?" Power Loader said. Izuku walked back to the suit as a queasy feeling filled his stomach. Someone had stolen his father's design and created a functional suit before Izuku had perfected the repulsor boots. This almost made his knees buckle. He couldn't hold himself up. Yet there was something more important at hand. Something that this suit, how crude it was, had proven. Izuku had to see how close to the margin it had gotten. "Let's see how far they got," Izuku said. He needed to see the suit in fullness, to see how far the villain had gotten in replicating his father's work. Izuku laid the helmet at the horizontal top of the pile. He then began to recreate the suit from the mess in front of him. As he had the blueprints memorized, the reconstruction was easy. He started the chest area and took a few minutes to get it assembled. He then moved out to the arms and had them laid out on the floor. They were so long they nearly doubled Izuku's wingspan. Then he finished with the legs, and when those were finished, the whole suit stood well over 7 feet tall. Some of the midsection armor was destroyed, but the internal exoskeleton was still intact, giving mass to the empty hole. Once the suit was reconstructed, Izuku stepped back and wiped the sweat from his brow. It had everything: the armor, the exoskeleton, the repulsors, but beyond that, nothing. It was just a much bigger copy of Mark I. Well, whoever built this didn't get too far. They didn't even try with the flight capabilities. There's no repulsors on the boots. Izuku lifted one of the feet to show the bottom, yet this person is skilled. They were able to build repulsors. Izuku dropped the foot, then brushed his hands off on his breath as he moved up to one of the arms and opened it on the palm. Even with proper blueprints, this person would need a high level of engineering intelligence to know what he was even looking at, let alone build them. Izuku noticed a small slit on the forearm. With a bit of force he pried it open, yet they aren't that smart, as they didn't change much. Empty missile silos. Probably didn't even know what they were for, just built them because they were in the blueprints. "What do you mean? They were able to build the suit, so shouldn't they have known what everything was for?" Mei said as she looked at the empty silos. "Not exactly, Hatsum. When you first build stuff, your creations were crude and often broke," Izuku said. "They still do," Power Loader mumbled under his breath. "Yes," Mei said, confused about what Izuku's point was. "Because your level of skill was low, but now you have experience. If you had half the experience you have today, and then took a look at my father's designs, do you think you would be able to build everything and understand what it was all for?" Izuku said. Mei paused for a bit as she thought over Izuku's question. "I think I would build everything, but to know what everything was for, then no. I would build it because it was in the blueprints, I guess, like building a model kit. You are able to put it together because you have a step-by-step guide." Exactly, a good engineer can build a blueprint, but still not fully understand why or how what they build works. My father's designs are just a little more advanced, so we're looking for someone with an above-average level in mechanical engineering. But even they ran into the same problem as my father. Izuku pried open the chest area. Their power source, whatever it was not enough to power this suit for very long. And with the bigger exoskeleton, their times were probably even less than their initial calculations. Izuku looked over the arm joints. Actually, no power was lost moving the bigger joints. I'll have to study this move to find out how they managed that. Was anyone hit by the suit? Eraserhead, but he'll live. Recovery Girl did ask for a bonus though, Powerloader said. Izuku explained that the increased strength made Powerloader fearful of what could have happened if the villain knew what they were doing when building and operating the suit. Eraserhead's broken ribs would have probably been the least of the school's worries. Izuku nodded, then continued. While they were about to make some improvements, he then moved back to the hands and looked over the repulsors. They were a little better designed than the blueprints Izuku had received. But with all the improvement he had made, his version was better. But overall it was a rushed job, or they would have made the same improvements I have made, with the couplings and the pulse delay. They had a short time to build this suit and assumed the fight wouldn't be that long, or they would have spent time making improvements. Overall, the suits of this size would have lasted at max 10 minutes, 15 minutes, less if they used the repulsors too much. Izuku wanted to smile because here it finally was. Proof that his father's design for Project Hero suit could work in its fullness, or frown since it was being proven by a villain. Proof that everything he had been building towards work and could be used to make him a hero. Or was it so stained now that people would only see the suit being used by a villain? Izuku, what are you thinking? You have that look, Mei asked, crouching next to Izuku. Izuku always said that Mei had this look on her face when she was absorbed into working on her project. And Mei said Izuku had the same look whenever he was in thought. Thoughts were best not shared. I don't know how to feel, because here. Izuku gestured to the whole suit. Here is proof that what my father was working on, what I was working on to create, works. It works and is a viable option, something I can use to become a hero. But we only know that because a villain was the one that proved it. They stole from my father, turned his creation, his invention into this weapon of destruction. I guess I want justice. Justice for my father and his memory. When people see my suit, I want them to look up and see peace, but not horror and destruction. Izuku said, tears forming in his eyes. Powerloader had seen where that trail of thought had led. He was going to clip it with its bud. Midoriya, your father created a weapon, one he knew could be dangerous. That is why he entrusted it to you. What this villain created was an abomination. Don't allow your mind to focus on fighting the villain. Focus on becoming a hero. Powerloader walked over, crouched down, and put a hand on his student's shoulders. Izuku didn't speak for a few minutes. He just continued to look down at the suit. Then it's a race to see who creates the best suit. Me against this villain, whoever they are, and it's a fight to see who is better. I have to build a suit and make it mine, and I'm already 10 steps behind. Izuku looked up at the helmet and walked up to it. He looked at it for a few seconds. Izuku felt some anger build up in his chest, but he kept it tempered until he yelled and punched the helmet. Izuku's fist carved the cover in, leaving it unwearable. Whoever you are, I will make it to the finish line before you do. I'll spend every free moment I have here, working invention, building. Then when we fight, I'll win. I'll show you that you don't mess with the Sutaku family and their invention. I'll show we're superior. I'll use my father's design to become a hero. Then I'm going to find you, wherever you are, and then I'll bring justice to my father. I show to the world what kind of man my father was, the greatest inventor in the world. Powerloader was uneasy about how Izuku worded his small speech, but the look in his eyes was the same All Might always wore. Izuku was going to bring justice, but not allow himself to get lost in it. Powerloader could only help. Izuku would be able to keep that light. I told you he could help. He used my quirk to defeat that horrible creature. He wanted nothing more than to help and protect his friends. A female voice said somewhere within the ether. It sounded like she was almost begging for help. Please, he doesn't even think of them as friends. Even mentally, he only sees them as classmates. And in the beginning, he was more worried about saving his own skin, afraid All for One had found him. A male voice scoffed, though it was coming from a completely different direction. Even then, he really didn't act under. He thought that man that claimed to be Shigaraki wasn't All for One. So try all that you want. He's still a villain. Only the son of one. Maybe if we weren't here, he wouldn't have changed, but the reality is that we're here and he wants to help people. The female voice said, trying to calm the conversation. Please, until I see that his first and foremost only thought is protecting someone, I won't do anything you and he asks of me. I might be stuck with you, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. The male voice said in a strong tone. When Gaizan first regained consciousness, he stopped himself from opening his eyes. It was the general reaction for someone to open their eyes when they first regained consciousness. However, he had been knocked out by his power enough times to know that immediately one's eyes was a good way to temporarily blind yourselves and cause the surefire headache to become worse. So when Gaizan formed his first thought, it was, don't open my eyes. As Gaizan kept his eyes closed, he felt around the bed he was lying in. There were rail guards on either side of him, and along with the thin blanket and deflated pillow, it was obvious he was in a hospital bed. His hearing slowly came back, and he could hear the steady beat of a heart monitor. He was definitely in a hospital, most likely UAS Personal 1, meaning he was being watched by Recovery Girl. Gaizan lifted his arm and found something strange about them. On each of his wrists were cold metal rings that were clanging around. Gaizan smiled as he realized what they were. He had been handcuffed to his hospital bed and made a smart decision, and no doubt done at the order of All Might, or Movi even did it himself. And despite how it looked and what it could be perceived as, Gaizan couldn't blame his teacher. He had just revealed he knew who All For One was, a person you don't just know unless you meet him. And the only way you leave meeting All For One alive is if you're in his good graces. Even then, Gaizan could fuzzily remember him also mentioning One For All. That was a secret almost as less known as All For One, a quirk that was passed from generation to generation. The next user stronger than the previous one. Though All For One was kind enough to provide that part of the story, once Gaizan's father asked why he had to plant a virus in Might Tower. The MSDR villain was mute about the origin of such a quirk, though Gaizan never had to question why All For One was after it. Maybe All Might wasn't as dumb as Gaizan thought he was, something Gaizan won't ever tell him. Gaizan knew about both quirks. It was easy to see why his loyalties were in question. The last thing Gaizan remembered from the battle was a portal opening in front of All Might and the Namu rocketing out of it. At that sight, Gaizan knew that he had to help All Might, no matter what. All For One had told Gaizan's father about All Might's injury, and Gaizan recognized the smoke coming off the #1 hero as not a good sign. A sign that he was about to transform. A sign Gaizan recognized from seeing the times All For One stole a transforming quirk. After seeing All Might needed help, Gaizan remembered himself yelling no and leaping at All Might, but past that, it seemed Gaizan's mind had just deleted those memories. All of it. Well, besides Recovery Girl yelling at him and explaining that if he had fought anymore, he would have begun to damage his quirk. Gaizan suspected the Recovery Girl would give him another earful when he recovered enough, and nothing else to make sure it got through his thick skull. All Gaizan could really wish for now was that he was in his own bed. And what were those two voices that he thought he heard? It sounded like one of them, the female one, was trying to help him. Was his mind trying to make sense of all that he had heard Recovery Girl say, stitching together different sentences out of order? Gaizan was resting on his hospital bed for about 10 minutes before he heard the door swing open. He could have easily opened his eyes and met his interrogator, but for one, he already knew who they were, as there were only two people who would be the most interested in talking to him. Second, he enjoyed the peace the darkness in his eyes gave him, allowing him to focus on the moment. Gaizan heard two very different footsteps. One was light, very different from the power the person actually held. The second pair was accompanied by a pair of crutches, confirming who was talking to him. But then Gaizan noticed something new. As Gaizan directed his attention to the newcomers, he felt their quirks, not in a sense of aura, or their power level or what their quirks could do, but he got a sense of longevity from both, while the smaller source held an extra piece of worldly freedom. Gaizan was caught off by this new sense he seemed to have gained, and knowing who would want to talk to him helped make sense of what the feelings were from. Gaizan then heard a pair of curtains being moved and someone clearing their throat. However, before either of them could say a word, Gaizan said, "All Might, Uraraka, I assume you're here to talk about what happened." The two in the room paused, not speaking, as they hadn't prepared for Gaizan to be fully awake and conscious. Recovery Girl informed us your heart rate returned to normal 10 minutes ago, but she didn't feel you would be collected enough to hold a conversation, Toshinori said, then gave a dry cough into his hand. Well, I am fully conscious and able to speak my mind. I'm used to waking up from being unconscious. I'm conscious enough to know about these, Gaizan said, shaking his arm around and making the HNDCFFS hit the railing. Gaizan could sense the glare Ochako was directing towards their heroics teacher. And while not unwarranted, Gaizan was happy that Ochako wasn't pleased. A few moments before Toshinori spoke, and when he did he said, "Hisahito, everyone is entitled to their secret. I would know that better than most, despite my public image. However, the secrets you somehow know are not the kind of secrets that are good to have. Yours aren't. Sorry. As you said, everyone is entitled to their secret. And with that, they are allowed to choose with whom and when they share those secrets," Gaizan said, waiting for his teacher to stop beating around the bush and just ask the question. He was starting to feel a bit irritable, and though he had just woken up from a nap that was probably made tomorrow, he would have liked to go back to sleep. Yes, but some secrets are best shared with others, to help share the load they cause, Toshinori said with a pause in the middle. He had expected to come across someone, let alone a high school that knew about One for All and All for One, and trying to play it out the window and act like he didn't know Gaizan knew it was out the window. Yet what was the best way to play it as Gaizan's loyalties were in question? Gaizan waited for Toshinori to ask the question, but he didn't. Gaizan then noticed something in the way Toshinori spoke. He wanted to ask the question but at the same time didn't. He didn't want to be here, but he was out of some sense of. Better to never ask the question and live in bliss than to live with the burden of truth. Are you too afraid to ask the question because of what you might learn or because you don't want to be told you failed? Ochako looked from Gaizan to her mentor and asked, "What is he talking about?" Toshinori didn't answer his successor's question but asked, "How do you know about All for One?" That would answer several questions in one go. But still, it didn't answer the question that was the most different. Gaizan sensed the hidden camera in the corner of the room, giving a warning to whoever was looking at it. The small red light blinked, then went out. Gaizan then dropped his head back down to his pillow. Not even Principal Nezu knows about this, so don't go telling him. I know about All for One because my father worked for him, Gaizan said. He didn't want his history to come up, but he owed All Might and Ochako that much. My real name is Asapakusu Jr., son of Asapakusu. Living Taser, Toshinori said. I'm familiar with his work. His ability to avoid capture was infamous among heroes, and his ability to steal anything was famous among the villains. Toshinori had never had a personal run-in with the villain but heard from others how strong it was to catch the villain, with Living Taser always looking over his shoulder and on the hunt for his next score. That wasn't the best environment to raise a kid. And how would a son of a villain such as the Living Taser come to find themselves at UA? Perhaps as a spy. Toshinori shook his head at that thought. If it came down to it, Gaizan would confess. Energy Soul was the name of my father, and it allowed him to transform into living energy and move along power lines. My quirk is not my father. It's called energy absorption, Gaizan began. Like Namu's shock absorption? Ochako pointed out. Could that mean Gaizan and Namu's quirk work in similar ways? Gaizan did seem to absorb kinetic energy and empower himself. At least that's how it looked to Ochako the few times Gaizan had used his quirk. Jiazan paused for a second, then said, I don't know, maybe, but it sounds like it can only absorb kinetic energy, such as a punch from All Might. My quirk, while not as strong, has more variety. I can absorb any kind of energy, from thermal to kinetic to electric. My quirk stores that energy, and I can use it to enhance my strength and speed. Toshinori coughed into his hand, bringing the attention of the conversation back to him. That, however, doesn't matter how you know All for One, or why your father worked for him. He is not the kind of man to hire or trust any low-level street thief, Toshinori said, wanting to get to the elephant in the room. You said it yourself. My father's ability to steal anything was well known in the criminal underground. And when you're the best at something, you work for the best. One day my father got a job stealing from a villain by the name of Shigaraki. And as it turns out, Shigaraki is All for One's real name. Gaizan heard a small gasp from Toshinori, signaling the #1 hero had never taken the time to learn the real name of his greatest enemy. Obviously my father got caught, as you simply don't steal from the world's greatest villain without being caught. Luckily for my father, All for One was merciful and allowed my father to steal the strong drive. However, for the deal, my father would have to steal something of equal value to All for One. After completing his job, my father got a job from All for One to steal some information from some inventor. Never heard the inventor's name of what the information was. But my father completed the job and never heard from All for One. Until 6 months my father received another job from the so-called Demon Lord. That was the first and second of many jobs my father completed for All for One. Then how are you here? Toshinori asked. Son of a notorious thief who worked under one of the most notorious villains. Someone couldn't simply disappear from All for One's radar. Even a new identity and moving to a new country would only work for so long. Would you believe me if I said I never wanted to be a villain? I could never find it in my soul, the want to hurt other people for selfish reason, Gaizan said as he shifted in his bed. Then how did you escape? Ochako asked. I never had a chance to, but then my father died. He was out stealing something and an accident occurred. The moment I heard about it, I knew All for One would come looking for him, for me for payment. So I disappeared, created the identity of Gaizan Hisahito and hid until I applied and got into UA. When Shigaraki Jr. appeared at the USJ, I thought All for One had finally found me, yet they were there for you, All Might. So that's my story, what's yours? Gaizan said. Toshinori and Ochako looked at each other. They were clearly having a silent conversation, but the hushed breath they took. Gaizan waited for a whole minute before he coughed and said, It seems I gained a new aspect of my quirk. Now I can sense both of yours. And though I am new to this power, I believe no two quirks should feel as identical as yours too. Neither of them said anything, so Gaizan added, You're worried that I'll talk. I have multiple reasons for why I won't. But for now, understand I shared my secrets because eventually, we'll need to trust each other. And as I said after the attack, I know about One for All. Toshinori took a deep breath and then said, My quirk is called One for All. It's a stockpile quirk that is passed from user to user. With each new user, One for All's power increases. I, myself, am the 8th user in Young Uraraka. Here is the 9th. The true history of One for All and how it was created was something only the user ever really needed to know. And Toshinori held to the belief that Ochako wouldn't need to fulfill its purpose. Gaizan nodded, then turned his closed eyes towards Ochako. I guess that explains the extra strength you displayed in our fight against Namu, as your quirk registered as 0 gravity. Ochako was caught off guard by how Gaizan had that information. How? Ochako left the rest of the question unfinished. Ochako had never said what the name of her quirk was. So when she gained control over One for All, she could say a name that was covered by quirks. Son of a thief. I know the quirks of everyone here at the school, Gaizan said as he suddenly slipped his hands out of the HNDCFFS and revealed them. He sat up and opened his eyes to see their shocked expression. Toshinori took a small step forward as if he wanted to redo the cuffs. However, he stopped as Gaizan dropped his hands to his lap. Ochako chuckled a bit, then said, I'm new to One for All and haven't really had a chance to train with it. The USJ was the first time I've used it. Well, you can see the result. Ochako moved her arms as if presenting herself. Gaizan looked Ochako over and saw her legs were tightly wrapped in gauze, and her right arm was in a sling. Gaizan noticed light scarring on Okako's hand and assumed there were more under the wrappings. Gaizan rubbed his knuckles and said, Yeah, I understand what you mean. When he first received his force multiplier quirk, his body had become littered with scars as he trained with it. However, those all disappeared when he got his regeneration quirk, but Gaizan still trained to make sure he could control his extra strength. What do you mean? Ochako asked as she finally sat down in a chair. Sorry, but that is a secret I take to my grave. But I will tell you, as I trained my quirk, I learned that if I always threw a 100% punch, then my body couldn't withstand the recoil. I assume something similar is happening to you. Your body doesn't know how to regulate its new quirk, something All Might probably hasn't taught you, probably because he never had to deal with it, Gaizan said, throwing a glare at Toshinori. It was his quirk the most recently, and it was his duty to teach Ochako how to use it. Great, you're starting to sound like my old teacher, Toshinori said, shivering at the thought of his old UA teacher. Me, however, I can provide some insight into regulating One for All, if you're interested, Gaizan said. That threw Toshinori and Ochako for a loop. In the past few hours, Jiazan had revealed he knew about One for All and All for One. He knew the villain personally. His father had worked under him. But now Gaizan was offering to teach Acheok how to use One for All, and to what end All for One was dead. Teach me. We've only known each other for less than 2 weeks. Why are you offering to teach me? Ochako asked as she was surprised by Gaizan's offer. He seemed like a down-to-earth person, but to make that kind of offer that soon. Ochako Uraraka, daughter of Hoshi and Mio Uraraka, only child, born in my prefecture on December 27th, which makes you a Capricorn by 5 days. Your BLD type is B and your height is 156 centimeters, per your doctor's appointment at the beginning of this year. Would you like me to continue? Gaizan said, then noticed the confusion on Ochako's face. Remember, son of a thief. As for wanting to train you, I have my own personal reason, but you're the next symbol of peace. You're going to need all the help you can get. Gaizan said. What for? Toshinori asked. Clearly, you're not as smart as you think, nor as powerful, Gaizan said as he slumped forward a bit. He then faced Ochako and then Toshinori. Clearly you haven't put everything together. Shigaraki Jr. Namu with multiple quirks, my father working for him. My father only died 2 years ago and he only began working for One for All 6 years ago. You tried All Might and you got close, but One for All isn't as dead as you think he is. It didn't take long for the rest of the school to find out about the attack, as soon as the media showed up at the front gate to talk about the incident. To show that as the staff of UA, Principal Nezu and the teacher were taking the attack seriously, they cancelled school for the rest of the week. Yet while the main campus was empty, it was still busy with UA staff preparing lessons. Principal Nezu was locked in his office by the number of phone calls and emails he had to work through. The news was having a field day with the USJ attack, so Principal Nezu had to make statements about how UA was still a safe place for students to learn. Along with working with Power Loader to improve UAS security, Principal Nezu could easily call this the busy start to a year. The only one who was actually grateful was Mr. Aizawa, who was doing what he always did when he had a free moment, even more so since he needed to heal. The rest of the campus was quiet, well, except for a classroom in the support department. Izuku had spent the last few days in classroom 6G working on his hero suit. This time he had the addition of the metal suit used during the USJ attack, which was hanging in one of the corners. Except Izuku wasn't looking at it. He was looking at a holographic copy of it that stood in the middle of the room, at full size, meaning it towered over Izuku. He was comparing it to the Project Hero suit Mark I, whose hologram was over the holo table. They looked very similar to each other in design with few artistic choices. The villain's suit had sharper edges and the faceplate had a more scrolling shape to it. Then there was the more noticeable difference, the overall size difference. Sir, you've been looking over these for the past 2 days. What do you hope to achieve? Jebisu asked as Izuku took another sip of water. That was a habit he was glad he hadn't picked up from Mei, of allowing her health to suffer because she was too focused on a project. Honestly, I don't know, Jebisu. I mean, I have my father's blueprints. I've looked them over some many times and I practically have them memorized. Yet nowhere within my father's notes does he state that he managed to get a working prototype of the suit. Now I have this. Izuku tapped the hologram of the villain's suit. This crude copy in front of me, it follows the same design, so it proves that my father's designs work. Yet here I am following the same blueprints, same design, and I can't make anything work. There has to be something different, or my father would have gotten a working prototype. I'm just hoping that by seeing these differences, I might get an idea of how to perfect my boots. I tried the same fixes I did for my gauntlets, but they aren't working. Izuku explained, his voice dropping to almost be called depressed. Sir, you understand this suit you are comparing. It too does not have flight capabilities, Jabisu said, pointing that fact out for the nth time. Izuku had lost track after the 37. I know, but still it's the only proof that my father's designs can work as one. The exoskeleton, the armor, the wiring, everything can and does work. Just think about it. My father had these designs but could never get a physical prototype to work. One issue was a power source, solved by my quirk. A side issue to that was finding a way to siphon my quirk to power the suit, solved by Hatsum Industries and their arc reactor, Izuku said, tapping the arc reactor that was hidden under his shirt. And because of this, my father never truly found out if his design for the hero suit works. Izuku walked over and placed his head against the holographic copy of the villain suit. If it had physical matter, Izuku would have hit his head against it. He got each individual piece to work, but never had one full suit. So by studying this villain suit, I'm hoping I can put everything together, find that one piece I'm unable to find, that my father had but was deleted. And they have my suit. And I'm working on improving it so when I come across this iron giant as dubbed by the media, and I face him, I have the superior suit, and maybe along the way, impress the hero teacher at the sports festival and get transfers. Izuku looked over at the calendar that was on the wall that had the days counting down until the sports festival, the first deadline that had to be reached. I understand, sir, but by all accounts, your father's design is far superior. You said it yourself, the villain made a crude copy of it. Your father's design is faster, stronger, more powerful. So what can the villain's suit possibly teach you? Jabisu asked. Yet he never had a full working prototype. Izuku had no idea why he was arguing with an advanced learning AI. Izuku sighed as he stepped away from the hologram, a motion he had made several times throughout the past few days. He was holding to the belief that by stepping back, he would notice some difference. Yet just as the times before, Izuku didn't notice anything. No hint of a direction to move in. I don't, Jabisu. The only thing I do know is that once I figure it out, I'll be kicking myself over it for days. Could it be the villain's quirk that allowed the suit to function as it did? Jabisu asked. Izuku thought for a moment. As with all the crazy quirks in the world, it was a possibility. It is a possibility, but without knowing who the villain was or what their quirk is. Quirk biology is kind of out of the question. Izuku said he had already scanned the suit for tissue samples but found nothing. The internal operating system didn't have a record of who the villain was or what kind of server their external server was, so it had come back to square one of brutes forcing his way through it. As Izuku sat down, he continued to stare at the different holograms, until a knock came from the door, drawing Izuku's attention away from the holograms. Izuku looked at the door, but a second knock hadn't come, making him believe he had imagined it. Izuku began to look back at the holograms when a succession of knocks occurred. Pushing himself off the floor, Izuku walked over and opened the door. Maybe a teacher had noticed the lights were on late in the night and thought a student was still on campus. He had permission from Principal Nezu and Powerloader, so Izuku was fine to be here. But as Izuku's projects within Classroom 6G were secret, none of the teachers would know that. And with school being cancelled, most of the teachers weren't on campus, and those that were didn't have any reason to come to the support department. So when Izuku opened the door, he was surprised to see All Might on the other side. He was wearing a yellow pinstripe suit and had his iconic smile on. He was holding out a plate, which had a sandwich and a bottle of soda like he was offering them to Izuku. Hello, All Might. What are you doing here, sir? Izuku said, taking several steps back, causing him to nearly trip over and fall. He was planning on hunting the symbol of peace down to get an autograph, but with the USJ attack and receiving the villain suit, Izuku hadn't found the time to do so. And never in a million years would he have expected the hero to hunt him down. Hello, Izuku Midoriya, you're right. May I enter? All Might asked as he stood up tall, allowing Izuku to take in the entirety of being in the presence of the #1 hero. Yes, sir, I'm Izuku Midoriya. You can come in, Izuku said, quickly turning around and letting All Might in. Izuku had started to go by Izuku Midoriya since finding Classroom 6G. All Might had to crouch a little as he walked through the door. He quickly noticed the 3 different suits, all in their respective locations. To what do I owe for the pleasure of this visit? All Might could see the panic. No. Fear. No, that didn't sound right. All Might was quite familiar with seeing fear on his opponent's face. Young Midoriya did show that. Excessive fanboying. That sounded right to describe the expression on Izuku's face. So All Might laughed and said, "You're not in trouble, young Midoriya." "No, that's not it. It's just..." Izuku turned around and faced the #1 hero. You're my #1 favorite hero. Beyond just the public, you're the reason I worked so strong to get into UA. Even with my quirk and its roundabout way it works, which adhered above videos 1000 off times and it always gave me hope of being able to become a hero myself. All Might paused for a moment. He remembered when Powerloader stormed into Principal Nezu's office and left with the deal with Mr. Aizawa. Powerloader talked about how it seemed Izuku had worked so strong to do as well as he had in the test and could have potentially done better but was cut short due to some bad luck and ended up failing due to some bad luck. Well, take some pride in your accomplishment. Many say getting into UA supports course is just as strong as getting to the hero course. They just push different things to their limits, quirks versus a person's mind. A small thanks came from Izuku as his face got red. But I don't think I've answered your question. Izuku looked confused. You asked why I was here. First, this is for you. All Might handed the sandwich and soda to Izuku. Izuku accepted the food just as his stomach growled. Izuku looked at the clock on the wall. Was it already past noon? You see, I became curious about the location of the metal giant suit from the USJ. I recall Powerloader had some bots take it away. I talked to him and he gave me this location. Also told me one of his students had been spending the past few days in the classroom. Asked me to check up on you too. Well, thank you, sir, Izuku said, sitting down at a desk and beginning to eat the sandwich. All Might nodded as he walked up to the hologram in the middle of the room. But why did you want to see the suit? I have it on good word that the villain that had created the suit did so with the sole purpose of fighting me. However, he never got a chance to test it, as one of 1A's students handled it mostly on his own. Now this student is quite strong and I've seen the footage of his fight. But I was still curious as to what could make the villain believe he could defeat him. All Might said, looking over the hologram. Then he noticed the reconstructed suit hanging in the corner of the room. He had seen how it looked after the fight as it had been in pieces, but now he could see how the damage it had received. Though Gaizan had said it was Shigaraki that put them out of commission in the end. And that statement was obviously true from the large hole in the side of the suit. Clearly the villain would have no chance of defeating you if he couldn't defeat a student of 1A, Izuku said, still working to not sound nervous. All Might had feats of strength that were beyond the world, and Izuku didn't think that his own suit when he had it finished would be able to withstand many of All Might's punches. Well, as I said, the student is quite strong, which piqued my curiosity in the suit. What information do you have for this suit? All Might asked as he wasn't an engineer but hoping Izuku could provide some insight. As in, do you know how strong it could have punched? Could have being the key words here. Izuku said, thankful for the chance to talk about something he was quite well versed in. Since the suit is no longer functionally, these are just rough estimates. Personally, a punch from my gauntlets can generate on average 2000 PND per square inch, a little over double of a trained boxer. With the extra weight of the arm and hand, and the larger exoskeleton, a punch from the villain's suit could possibly generate over 5000 PND per square inch. All Might nodded, satisfied. But, Izuku continued, watching your videos online and based on common sense, I would say on average you generally punch with around 15,000 to 16,000 PND per square inch. However, your strongest punch ever recorded would most likely be up in the lower 20,000 range. All Might paused at that information. He knew he was strong, but he hadn't exactly gone to a gym or a research facility and had his punches recorded the few times he did. Well, he had to buy a new punching machine for the gym afterwards. Yet Izuku had done the math just based on videos he had seen online. Maybe Izuku could build a punching machine that could withstand a punch from All Might. Now that I've seen the suit, I'm satisfied. But these, All Might said, as he nodded to the hologram in front of him and pointed to the holo table, I'm afraid they bring up a few more questions. Why do I have the suit and why do I have a similar holographic copy of the suit? Izuku absent-mindedly said. And then he realized what he said. He looked up and saw All Might nod. Well, I think to best answer those questions, it would be to say, my version, more specifically my father's version of the suit, came first. You see that break-in last week? The villains from the USJ just didn't steal a class schedule. They also stole my father's designs and built a crude version of the suit. Yes, Principal Nezu mentioned part of the server being hacked. I thought they had merely done that to steal a school schedule, but it seems they were also after. You said your father's designs. All Might questioned. Something advanced. It was just a small pet project. It was a goal that could take a lifetime to achieve, so there was no way Izuku had created the design for high school. Masashi Sutaku. He was a teacher here a few years ago, Izuku said. All Might thought about it if he had somehow run into Hisashi at UA, but the times didn't seem to line up. However, the name did sound familiar. He designed the suit to run off of my quirk, as my quirk allows my body to generate high amount of electricity within my BLD, Izuku said, drawing All Might out of his thought. All Might looked over at Izuku and found him popping open the soda. And as for why you have the villain suit, All Might asked, gesturing to the hung-up suit in the corner. Powerloader is aware of my father's designs, so when he came across the villain's suit, he brought it here to compare designs, which I've been doing for the past few days. I've been running into some issues on my end, and with the suit I thought I could get some answer from it, Izuku said. All Might thought about it for a second, a few pieces sinking into place. He could see the similarities and differences between the suits. Comparing them to see why different things work was a good way to overcome technical issues. Heroes did similar things, learning from each other to handle different situations. There was one issue. Are your parents aware and okay with you spending the last few days in this classroom? My father died years ago, while my mother has been stuck in Fukuoka for the past few days. Something about her boss going missing, but I'm not supposed to know about that, Izuku said, standing up while taking small sips of his soda. His throat wasn't dry. The carbonation just felt good going down his throat. I'm hoping to get a working suit before the sports festival. That's the plan at least. But so far, nothing is coming to mind. No solution, no fix at all to the issue I'm having with my repulsor boots. All Might looked over the 3 sets of suits. He was sure his old friend David Shield would love to have a look at the suit. Maybe he could be able to fix the problems. That was if All Might could find the time to call his old years. It had been some time since they last met. Until then, well, I wish I could help, but it is rocket science, and I'm not a mad scientist, All Might said, giving a hearty chuckle. I guess it is. Thanks for lunch, All Might, Izuku said, bowing slightly to All Might. All Might returned the bow, then began to head towards the door. Izuku stood up and raised the soda to his lips. But then green lightning jumped behind his eyes and he froze. He looked between the suits, an idea forming in his mind. Wait, actually it isn't. The problem is rocket science, but the solution returns to basic math. I'm afraid you're not making sense, young Midoriya, All Might said, pausing as Izuku moved back to the holo table. Isn't it rocket science? Aren't you trying to quite literally strap a pair of rockets to your feet? Izuku bopped his head side to side and said, a funny notion and thought. But repulsor technology is a bit more advanced than simply creating enough downforce to overcome gravity. That's what made me stuck. I was trying to think about math. Come up with a solution that fits the complex of engineering. When it's simple work. Okay. When you have a set amount of weight, to increase the force you decrease the point of impact. The same principle is used in megaphones and bullets, Izuku said, manipulating the holo table, bringing up his boots as a separate file. I don't follow, All Might said, becoming confused once again. He really should have paid attention in math class in America. He had David Shield explain everything, but since he wanted to be a hero, he was fine with a passing grade in class such as those. Okay, think about it this way. What hurts more, a punch or a slap? Izuku asked, and after a few seconds, All Might raise a closed fist, correct? Because instead of attacking with an open palm, when you attack with a punch, the point of impact is refined to your knuckles, resulting in more damage. If I apply the same idea to my boot, decrease the repulsor outlet to a small area, the force should increase without increasing the amount of energy used, Izuku said, then began to rumble and he began manipulating the hologram with one hand and reading math equations with his other. Seeing that the world around Izuku had disappeared, All Might excused himself and left the support course student alone to work on his project. Izuku had stated he needed to get a working suit before the sports festival, making it clear All Might would be nothing but a distraction. It wasn't until the afternoon turned into the evening that Izuku realized something and kicked himself for not getting All Might's signature. 1 month before the UA Sports Festival. Video number 3, start. Alright, after a very eventful first 2 weeks of high school, Class 1 was attacked by some villains due to some unforeseen events. School was cancelled for a few days, so I was able to give my full attention to Project Hero Suit, and I think Izuku started walking into the frame. He was wearing his gauntlets, with the addition of boots. As he hadn't created the outer armor, the wireframes and all the wires were still visible, but Izuku had gotten good at making them all tidy. They were all bunched up together with zip ties, then run under to be hidden by Izuku's shirt and shorts, which all led to the green glow of his arc reactor. Mei scoffed off camera. Though she didn't do much to help Izuku, she still wanted recognition for the part she did help with. Izuku obliged because he knew it was the only way Mei would shut up about it. Correction, we have got it working. After several months, we finally have a working prototype for repulsor Hoover boots. Along with Mei Hatsumi, I would like to add Pro Hero All Might to the personnel that helped with this prototype. Izuku noticed a surprised look appear on Mei's face, reminding Izuku that he hadn't told her about his run-in with the number 1 hero. Today will be test flight number 1 of Mark III repulsor Hoover boots. Mei Hatsumi is still on fire safety, though at this point, I think I would prefer dummy. Also, as you can see, this is the first video on UA campus. We are in Gym Gamma. We only have a few minutes before some members of Class 1 arrive for some after-school training, and we have to leave. As always, I'll be starting off at half mark back from center. Izuku walked to his start point, Due to previous knowledge, we'll be starting with 2% move and see if we can achieve lift. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Izuku felt the repulsors beneath his feet hum for a bit, then begin to slowly lift him off the ground. The sound was almost deafening to Izuku, but when he got nearly a meter off the ground, the force coming out of his boots got enough space, and the sound quieted down. As Izuku hovered in the air, he struggled to keep his balance as his only points of stability were from his feet, which were directly underneath Izuku, not giving him much of an area of balance. Izuku came to sway back and forwards from the sense of instability, and this only worsened the problem. Then just as he leaned forward then kept going forward, Izuku instinctively shot his hands forward and said, "Gauntlets on, 2%. The repulsors in his hands quickly powered on and began pushing against Izuku. Now that he had 4 points to pivot off of, Izuku was able to slowly bring him back to stand. He grunted as he regained his balance and steadied himself. "All right, that was user error. I should have realized that balance between 2 points would be nearly impossible. And it seems that using 2% on both my arms and my feet is enough to slowly increase my height," Izuku said, as he looked back and saw that the ground was slowly getting further and further away. "So I'll be decreasing my power to 1%. Izuku felt the arc reactor begin to siphon off less of his body's electricity, and he was no longer being lifted. He was now over 2 meters above the ground, and he tried not to show his discomfort of being so high off the ground, but the nervous chuckle he gave didn't help. He took a deep breath and slowly leaned forward. While his feet went back, Izuku slowly brought his hands in front of him. He was able to slowly drift forward, and when he wanted to stop, he fully pointed his hands forward and brought his feet back around him. Izuku smiled as he had a handle on hovering and moving around. He slowly glided around the marked-off area, becoming more and more confident in his ability the more time he spent in the air. He still panicked every once in a while, moving his arms and legs around, but for the most part, he was able to stay calm and collected. This gave Izuku a sense of pride with a hint of CC kindness, as he was able to achieve and overcome a roadblock that had been with him still first getting his father's blueprints. Hisashi's blueprint worked by themselves, and now Izuku had proven they could work as one. Izuku was now beyond his father's plans and was in uncharted territory. He could push the boundaries of what he could do, and what better way to do it than by looking cool. Once Izuku was finished hovering around, instead of simply turning off his repulsors and dropping to the ground, Izuku wanted to test something out. So instead, Izuku cut all the power to his gauntlets while simultaneously increasing his boots and leaning forward. This caused him to shoot forward in a front flip. Then as his feet got close to the ground, Izuku cut the power from his boot. As he landed, he took a knee while throwing his right arm downwards and punched the ground. To the camera, it looked like he was doing a dramatic pose. But in all honesty, Izuku was just stopping himself from rolling forward. As he stood up, Izuku brushed some dust off of his shirt. He then turned to the camera, a stupid grin on his face. "Oh yeah, I can fly. Oi Taser, what the hell do you think you're doing here?" An angry video called out. Izuku quickly turned and promptly ran out of frame, with a few more incoherent yells in the backgrounds. Over the weekend, the media talked about the break-in and attack, nicknaming it the USJ attack, and every time Gaizan tuned on a news channel he heard the same discussion but in different ways. Was UA still able to protect their students? And what was UA's response? To cancel school for a week and look over its security and see if anything needed to be improved. A smart decision in Gaizan's opinion, though he understood that better than anyone else. All for One might not have any public ties to the attack, but the attack, the strategies, the Namu, it all had his brand under it. And if the self-proclaimed Demon Lord had decided it was time to come out hide and was openly attacking Hero School, well, UA would need to prepare itself. But how could it prepare itself against an enemy it didn't know existed? Gaizan knew he should give a warning, but he knew none of the staff would listen to him, let alone believe. He was just a first-year student and he was still cautious about revealing his past. That being said, Gaizan was glad when the weekend was over, as it was a chance to get away from the media and focus on school. A chance to get out of the house and away from his nosy neighbors who tried to talk to him. So when he arrived at the front gate of UA, he was surprised not to find any news station. The media and their stories moved quickly to new topics, but it was clear they weren't going to let UA hear the end of their mistake anytime soon. However, the reason for the lack of annoyance became clear as he got closer. As he walked up to the front gate, Gaizan noticed that Principal Nezu was sitting in a simple lawn chair sipping from a cup, with a teapot and coaster on a small table next to him. He was reading a newspaper, and Gaizan didn't even think those were used anymore. And yet, for some reason, Gaizan didn't understand why that was scarier than anything else that UA could have done. Principal Nezu turned a page and then cleared his throat. "Ah, Mr. Hisahito, good to see you're up and moving, as you had left Recovery Girl's room in quite a hurry in the dead of night, I might add. However, I must say, if there were 2 students I expected to skip school and I would be fine with, it would be you and Ms. Uraraka. You stood up to protect your friends, but harmed yourselves horribly. Principal then folded his newspaper down and looked over at Gaizan. Yet it seems you both have a strong fighting spirit and have worked through it. I'm excited to see how you have grown. Principal Nezu tucked the new paper under his arm, then grabbed his teacup that was resting on a small table next to his chair. Principal Nezu took a sip of tea and then returned the cup to the table. Uraraka, she's here. At school, Gaizan said. He didn't think Ochako would be coming back to school for the week. She was fine when she and Toshinori confronted him right after the attack. But as she left the room, Gaizan could see how she was just then processing the fight, as if talking to him was a bigger stressor in her mind than the attack. He could see the stress and fear that began to appear in Ochako's eyes. But maybe that had changed over the week and weekend. Maybe Ochako had talked about it with her parents and maybe talked to the therapist, something Gaizan was not able to do, but he still felt fine. He guessed that was because of his past. He had a strong mental fortitude. He had seen some dark things in his past. So the USJ attack wasn't that high on the list. Then again, fighting was his therapy, as when he was feeling stressed he would always attack his punching bag and let his mind work through the problem. That always worked for him and he saw no reason to change it. Don't worry, this week will be easygoing. We plan on easing back into everything from the attack, Principal Nezu said. And then the first bell rang. I suggest you get to class before your substitute begins. Gaizan smirked a bit, as if a racerhead would let that happen. Gaizan nodded to Principal Nezu, then took off for class, curious how he knew that. Anyone with one look at Shota won't think he would be available for teaching, Principal Nezu said, but dismissed that thought. He grabbed the teapot and poured himself another cup of tea. Gaizan soon arrived at the door to room 1A. As he approached the door, he could hear the noises of different conversations. Denki, Minta and Tsuyu were talking about how they handled themselves during the USJ. Zero, Ajiru and Kirishima were talking about what they did over the weekend, while Jiru and Momo were getting ready for class. Everyone else was talking about how they essentially became celebrities. Gaizan took a few more moments as his quirk flared up, his irises turning yellow for a moment. The next moment he could feel each and every one of his classmates' quirks. Each of them was unique and attuned to their quirks and personality. Bakugo's was short-fused but powerful. Todoroki was a perfect balance of temperature. Sato made Gaizan feel like he was going to get a cavity. Tsuyu's quirk gave the feeling of animalistic fury. Ilda's quirk was idling like a powerful engine, waiting for Ilda to use it. Denki's quirk gave Gaizan some chills with how electrifying it was, while always giving Gaizan the taste of metal. Jiru's quirk held a steady but precise beat. Koda was quiet but was holding down the roar of a lion. Minta's. Gaizan paused as even Minta's quirk gave Gaizan the want to hurt the little pervert. Zero's quirk had the feeling of speed and capture, while Kirishima felt immovable. Mina's quirk felt energetic and corrosive, while Ajiru's quirk was simplistic by honed to be a deadly weapon. Takoyami was dark and mysterious, and Gaizan could feel the preciseness of dark shadow. Shoji's quirk gave Gaizan a sense of multifunctionality. That was literally the only way Gaizan could put it. Toru, surprisingly, was covered in a blanket of darkness. Gaizan would have expected that for Takoyami. But this blanket didn't just hide her, it also hid her quirk. Momo's quirk was limitless, pure infinite potential. Then Gaizan came to Aoyama and his quirk shined as much on the inside as it did on the outside. But Gaizan felt something about Aoyama's quirk. It felt a little off, but Aoyama did also complain about how his quirk gave him a stomachache. However, the last warning bell went off, drawing Gaizan around from his thoughts. Gaizan took a deep breath to release his quirk and opened the door. All conversations went quiet and everyone looked at Gaizan. He could guess why. The last time they had seen him he was broken and beaten. His body was a mess of broken bones and muscles. He was willing to bet some of them thought he had died. Gaizan looked each of his classmates in the eyes, making sure they knew he was there and they weren't hallucinating anything. Then after a few seconds, he gave a small smile and said, "So then, who owes who money?" Everyone looked at Gaizan confused. Then Kirishima turned to Zero and said, "Told you they would be back." Kirishima had a big grin on his face as he had out a hand to accept the money. "Shut up," Zero said, putting out some money and slapping it down on Kirishima's desk. "Betting on your friends is not becoming a hero," Ilda said, waving his arms around like a robot. His actions got a few laughs out of the class. It was clear Ilda was back to his old self. Jiru turned to Kirishima as the red hair began to count the money. "So what exactly did you two bet on?" Kirishima finished counting the amount and slipped it into his pocket. "Zero bet me 100 yen that Hisahito was dead. I told him that Hisahito would drag his soul back into his body along with Uraraka." "What? No, I never bet on anything like that. I just didn't think they would be returning to school this week. I mean, Hisahito faced off against two of the higher-level villains, one of which he had to help All Might to fully take down. So they obviously got the worst of the attack. But it seems I was wrong on both accounts," Zero said, looking back at Gaizan. "Glad you're back. Glad I could make you lose some money." Gaizan said, looking at Ochako. She was sitting at her desk, looking down at the small wooden table. She had been making any conversion and didn't look up when Gaizan arrived, nor did she make any notice of the exchange of money. So as Gaizan walked past her on his way to his desk, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and whispered, "You did good." Yet Ochako grabbed no reply of any kind, so Gaizan continued. Once he reached his desk, he sat down. He pulled out his school materials and got ready for the first PRD when his irises turned yellow and he sensed a void of energy. The sensation was still new to him, and even with the limited practice he had with this, Gaizan immediately knew whose quirk he was sensing. The void of energy arrived in the door, and a few moments later the door opened. Gaizan had called it, despite being wrapped up in bandages. Mr. Aizawa walked into the room and overlooked his students. Even through all the bandages, it was clear he was wearing his typical tired face, showing that he rather just cancel class and go to bed and hadn't put out some subconscious need to force the best out of everyone. Mr. Aizawa walked over to his desk and stood there, just as Class 1 had noticed him, and they all yelled, "Mr. Aizawa, what are you doing here? My well-being is irrelevant. I still have a class to teach." Mr. Aizawa walked up to the front of the class and looked over the room. It was strong to tell, due to the bandages, but Gaizan felt like Mr. Aizawa was staring right at him for most of it, as if passing a message Gaizan didn't receive due to only seeing bandages. But he took it as thank you, as Mr. Aizawa's injuries could have been a lot worse if Gaizan hadn't jumped on. Mr. Aizawa then refocused and said, "What's more important is that your fight is not over yet." Everyone flinched a bit, while Gaizan chuckled a bit, earning him an annoyed look from Mr. Aizawa. Despite the attack, the staff of UA has decided that it is best to continue with the sports festival in 1 month's time. But why, sir? That would be a perfect opportunity for the villain to strike again, a larger crowd than last time, Ilda said, raising his hand. Before Mr. Aizawa could answer, Gaizan did for him. Attacking the UA Sports Festival would be useless to the villains, more than the USJ. Yes, there will be a larger crowd, but most of that crowd will be pro heroes, not to mention all the Hero Corps students. The Battle of Fists ended at the USJ, now it's a fight of willpower. By holding the UA Sports Festival, the administration is showing they've handled the threat and the school is safer than ever. Along with that, security will be beefed up compared to previous years. But Hisahito has stated the exact reason. UA is showing its strength that it recovered with the attack and moving forwards. On your end, this event is a huge opportunity. It only happens 3 times in your life, so it's important that you make the most of it, Mr. Aizawa said. He's right, the pro will be watching, scouting us for future internships and work studies. Momo called out. She had watched the sports festival since she could remember, even used 3 TVs so she didn't miss anything. Watching all the different quirks and seeing the different ways they worked always helped her think of new ways to use her quirk. This event can open and close many doors for you, so know how your actions will be seen. You'll be facing off more than just your classmates, but the rest of the first years, including students from the support department. You better not slack off in training, Mr. Aizawa said. Then dismissed the class. Everyone began talking about how excited they were for the sports festival. Gaizan gave a small thought of why Mr. Aizawa had pointed out the support department specifically. He had heard stories about them building the craziest invention, so Mr. Aizawa's comment made Gaizan wonder if there was a specific invention they needed to be on the lookout for. But Gaizan's wonder of it didn't last long, as he was pointed into a conversation with Kirishima, Siro, and Sato. As he talked with the trio, Gaizan occasionally shot a glance over to Ochako. Every time he saw the same thing. Ochako was sitting by herself, not talking to Tsuyu or anyone else. Clearly she was still deep in thought, worry hidden on her face. Throughout the morning, Gaizan didn't do anything, but as lunch neared it became evident he needed to intervene. He had given Ochako the opportunity to work through it on her own, to get out of her funk. But he had forced her out of it. Once class was called and the bell rang, Gaizan walked over, grabbed the collar of Ochako's jacket and hauled her to her feet. Without much resistance, Gaizan dragged her out of the classroom. Before leaving the room, Gaizan called out that they would meet everyone else at lunch. As Gaizan dragged Ochako to a remote hallway, she didn't fight him at all. Once no one was around them, Gaizan released Ochako. He quickly turned around and faced her, a disappointed look on his face. "You know, with the way you're acting, you're defeating the whole purpose of being here." "What are you talking about?" Ochako scoffed, giving Gaizan a confused look. She was just fine and she was feeling hungry. Gaizan had dragged her away from getting lunch and she easily got angry when she was hungry. "When I saw you in class, I thought maybe you were fine. But clearly you're not, with the way you're sulking," Gaizan said, his voice staying steady and only showing a small bit of annoyance. "I am not sulking," Ochako said, with an annoyed tone. She was feeling perfectly fine. She was over the attack. She didn't have nightmares about the attack anymore, not since Friday. "Then what do you call the depressed and deep in thought look you've had since school started?" Gaizan said, pointing down the hallway towards the room they had just come from. He waited for Ochako to respond. But she didn't, so he continued, now, I meant more than the obvious about the battle of wills. All for One knows about One for All. He's the one that told my father and I about it. He knows how it can get passed from person to person. And quirk that's strong, you can bet he's going to be coming after it. What do you think he's been trying to do from the beginning? And with how it gets stronger with each user, there's going to be a point where he will be done with his game of torture, where he'll actually put some effort into it. And to do that, he'll want you afraid. Because if you're afraid, then you can't think. You won't be able to see him coming. You won't be able to be a hero. And if you can't be a hero, then he's won. I mean it. At first I thought you were okay, but the whole class it looked like you were one bad thought away from having a mental breakdown. I wasn't, Ochako argued, then tried to walk away, but Gaizan grabbed her jacket and pulled her back. Gaizan slammed her a bit against the wall, then pressed her against it to keep her in place. Well, it sure looked like it. And if you have a mental breakdown every time something like this happens, then you won't be able to think, to see All for One's angle. If you can't handle that, then maybe you should have stayed home today, Gaizan said, looking Ochako in the eyes. Ochako tried to break free of Gaizan's hold, but he pushed her into the wall a bit more. If Ochako was okay, then she could easily use One for All and free herself. But her mind was so focused on the USJ attack that she couldn't think of anything like that. What do you mean by that? Are you calling me unworthy of One for All? Ochako said, now glaring Gaizan in the eyes. All Might had chosen her to be his successor, so why should Gaizan get any say in this? For all he was, the son of a thief, an ex-villain, why should he get a say in a quirk that was meant to destroy all evil? Why did you want to become a hero in the first place? What made you accept One for All and become the 9th user? Gaizan asked, as if not noticing the change in Ochako's demeanor. Why do you care? Ochako said, ing up her fists, acting like she was ready to fight. The moment Gaizan let go of her jacket, her hair took a small pink hue and Gaizan noticed. But he made no notice of it, as it meant his plan was working. Why did you try to get into UA? Why do you want to become a hero? Gaizan asked, his voice taking a more serious tone. He finally stared back directly at Ochako, his eyes locked on her. Ochako stared back and tried to push against Gaizan, One for All starting to pour into her strength. She began to push Gaizan's back, but his iris turned yellow and Ochaok was pushed back against the wall. Her body lost the fight to continue, so she yelled, why does that matter? I want to become a hero to be a hero. Yes, it does, Gaizan yelled. His eyes changed to a deep yellow. A few moments later, his eyes went back to normal. Though Gaizan had made no visible motion for the change to occur, he finally released Ochako but never broke eye contact as Ochako hid his hand away. Ochako continued clenching her fist until she took a deep breath and calmed down. Her hair losing its pink hue, promised not to laugh. Gaizan gave a slow nod. I'm in it for the money. Ochako looked at Gaizan, expecting him to react in some way. Laugh, because that's what everyone else did when she said she wanted to be a hero for the money, especially as his reason for becoming a hero was so noble. Yet he just stayed straight-faced, waiting for her to further explain. Ochako took a deep breath, then looked down at the ground. You see, my family hasn't always been well off. We've always kind of been flat broke and work hasn't been great lately. Growing up, I always wanted to help my parents, but they always told me to follow a different dream. I thought that by becoming a hero, I could get a license to use my quirk and bring down equipment cost, while at the same time bring some attention back to the Uraraka family name. Ochako looked at Gaizan, accepting for a reaction, yet he still had a neutral expression. That infuriated her even more than if Gaizan had reacted by laughing. It was even her answer was unimportant. So Ochako asked in a harsh voice, can you at least react in some way? How are you feeling? Gaizan asked, a question that Ochako was not expecting, as if talking about her family could get the USJ attack out of her mind. What? Ochako asked, now extremely confused. How are you feeling? Gaizan simply asked again. Ochako was still confused, but then noticed she felt lighter. Her mind was more focused and she was able to think more clearly. Her shoulder was straight and she was holding her head high. She felt more determined to become a hero than she ever did before, like talking about it made it seem more real. Gaizan noticed Ochako's renewed spirit and said, by focusing on your goals, you forgot about everything else. How scared you were. How unprepared you were for the responsibilities of One for All. To be a good hero, you'll have to learn to control your emotions. How to keep fighting with a smile, despite the pain. Ochako said, her voice dropping a sad tone. That was something All Might talked about. Since receiving his injuries in his hero form, he was always feeling pain. How he always had to fight through it, and to hide his pain he was always smiling. Gaizan simply nodded. For now, when you're beaten down and afraid, think about those you want to help. Your friends, your family. Allow them to be the reason you always get back up and keep smiling. Remember that until you come to a point where you can stand on your own. Ochako absorbed Gaizan's words as he began to walk away. As he reached the corner, he stopped and looked back, his face softer and a bit sad. "And I never called you unworthy, just unprepared. I have no say if All Might was right in choosing you. Nor do I if you still accept my assistance. Meet me in Gym Beta an hour after school is over. Bring that smiling idiot along with you." Gaizan disappeared around the corner, only for a few seconds later to say, in a happier tone, "Speaking of the devil, yeah, she's around the corner." Ochako looked down the hallway again, just in time for All Might to walk around. "Ah, young Uraraka, your classmates informed that young Hisahito had dragged you away for some kind of conversation. I hope everything was resolved. I thought I had heard some yelling." All Might said, "Yes, Tosh, All Might. Hisahito had some advice for me about the USJ." Ochako said, twirling her hair between her fingers. Gaizan might have noticed how downtrodden she was, but she rather have her mentor see that. "Well, I brought you some lunch. I was hoping to make a conversation with you," All Might said, pulling out a bento box. Ochako looked at it. She was never one to turn down free food, so she immediately accepted it. All Might led his successor to the teacher lounge, where he placed the bento box on the table. He then moved over to the couch and sat down, deflating as he did so. He coughed a bit, then faced Ochako. "I have some bad news. My hero time is down to only 50 minutes. And if it weren't for the assistance of young Hisahito, it would be much lower. My fight against Namu took a lot out of me." Toshinori looked at Ochako. Yet it seemed she wasn't fully paying attention as she was stuffing her face with food. "I'm sorry, I was hungry." "Something about 50 minutes, Ochako said, with her mouth full. She quickly swallowed the food and gave an embarrassed look. "Nothing that really means to be repeated," Toshinori said, as he was more than happy to let his successor not feel the weight of responsibility so bad. Even more now they knew All for One was still alive. "Besides, I'm here to talk to you about the sports festival. The biggest issue is that you don't have complete control over One for All. You have your zero-gravity quirk, so what's your plan for the festival?" Toshinori asked, placing 2 cups of tea on the table. "I really don't know. I guess use zero-gravity as much as I can. I know the last round of the tournament is always one-on-one fights. So I think if I can get close enough to my opponent and take away their gravity, it would render them kind of useless," Ochako said, taking a small sip of tea. "And for One for All?" Toshinori asked. Ochako thought for a second, then perked up a bit. "I didn't really think about this until 2 days ago. But when Hisahito and I were fighting Namu, my attacks, I don't know how else to explain it. They felt more controlled. I didn't injure my arm or my legs, not until our last attack. I went beyond One for All limits." Ochako then recalled how she had started to push against Gaizan. Had she done the same with then of how she was focused on Gaizan? Had she been able to subconsciously control One for All? "Why do you think that was?" Toshinori asked. Ochako thought about it for a bit. She wasn't using One for All in a new way. She wasn't using a different visualization than the one All Might had given her. She was just as reckless as before. But then again, there was something new to the equation. "It was the first time I was using it against another person." Toshinori nodded and said, "It sounds like your subconscious puts the brakes on One for All. You were attacking a person, not an object. Your subconscious didn't want to hurt this person, even if they were a villain, a Namu at that, but I digress. You put a wall up to stop yourselves from doing so until you need its full power. But how do I recreate that feeling? It's not like I can ask one of my classmates to stand there and let me repeatedly punch them. I don't know if I could recreate that feeling so easily," Ochako said. As she spoke, she could think of 1 or 2 classmates she wouldn't mind repetitive punching with One for All, and one had just offered his help. "I don't think you need to ask, as one of your classmates has already offered his assistance and his quirk will help keep him mostly uninjured. Young Hisahito may be able to provide some helpful insight. But remember, One for All is a quirk unlike anything in this world. A power he hasn't experienced himself. That said, I believe his past will provide much guidance in other aspects. Respect him. As for right now, he is your superior, as well to most students at this school, in power and experience," Toshinori said.